The doors of the Ironvale throne room had not been opened for a public assembly in 3 years. They opened that morning with a sound like the earth splitting, and every wolf in the hall felt it in their chest before they heard it with their ears. The King Cayden Voss did not look up from the papers on his desk when the doors opened. He did not need to. He could feel the shift in the air, the way 200 wolves collectively held their breath, the way the silence changed shape the moment he was visible to them. He had grown used to that silence. He had learned, a long time ago, how to use it. He was 31 years old. He had been king since he was 22, the youngest alpha to take the Ironvale throne in 4 generations, and in the 9 years since, he had not given anyone a single reason to doubt that the throne fit him. He sat in it the way mountains sat on the earth, without effort, without apology, as if the weight of it were simply part of what he was. He finished reading the paper in his hand, set it down with precision, and looked up. 200 wolves exhaled. His beta, Ryn Cole, stood at the side of the platform. Ryn was 34, broad, steady, with the kind of face that had never learned to look surprised. He had been Cayden's beta for 6 years and his closest friend for 12, which meant he was one of the very few people alive who could look at Cayden's expression and read what was actually there, beneath the surface of the cold. What Ryn saw that morning was focus. Sharp, clear, undiluted focus. Cayden was not angry. He was not posturing. He was simply present, and his presence alone was enough to make the air feel thinner. Lord Greywood has sent his monthly tribute, Ryn said quietly, stepping close enough that only Cayden could hear. It is short again. How short? 40%. Cayden's jaw moved once, a small adjustment, barely visible. Then we will have a conversation with Lord Greywood about what the word tribute means. He will say the harvest was difficult. The harvest is always difficult when a man does not want to pay what he owes. Ryn nodded. He did not push further. He had learned, over the years, exactly where Cayden's lines were and how close he could walk to them. The assembly that morning was not unusual. It was the kind of gathering that happened twice a month, where the pack members who had business with the throne could bring it forward, where disputes could be settled, where information could move in both directions. Cayden ran these assemblies the way he ran everything, efficiently, without waste, without the performance that some alpha kings put into their public appearances. He did not roar. He did not pound his chest. He did not remind anyone who he was, because everyone already knew. The first case that morning involved a boundary dispute between 2 families in the northern quarter of the territory. The 2 men stood before him, both of them tense, both of them doing that thing that people did when they were trying not to look nervous in front of the king, standing very straight, speaking very carefully, using words that were slightly too formal for their normal vocabulary. Cayden listened to both of them fully before he spoke. That was one of the things that surprised people who had only heard about him from a distance. They expected him to cut people off, to decide quickly, to dismiss the smaller concerns as unworthy of his time. Instead, he listened with the same quality of attention he brought to everything, and when he had heard enough, he asked 2 precise questions that got to the center of the matter faster than either man had managed in 10 minutes of talking. He gave his ruling. It was fair. One of the men looked relieved. The other looked frustrated but could not find grounds to argue. Cayden moved to the next case, and he worked through 12 more cases over the next 2 hours. A trading disagreement, a complaint about a guard captain, a petition from a family requesting territory reassignment after a flooding event, a question about pack law regarding unmated omegas working outside the territory. He handled each one with the same quality of attention, the same precision. It was during the break between the 15th and 16th case that Ryn appeared at his shoulder again. "There is something you should know before the afternoon session," Ryn said. Cayden did not look up from the documents he was reviewing. "Tell me." "The Greywood enforcers arrived this morning. They brought someone with them." Something in the air changed, very slightly, not enough that anyone else in the room would have noticed. Ryn noticed, because Ryn noticed everything about Cayden that Cayden did not advertise. What kind of someone? An Omega, a woman. They say she is a debt payment. Her father apparently owed Greywood a significant sum when he died, and she has been passed around as labor between 3 territories trying to work it off. The debt was sold to Ironvale apparently 6 months ago, but no one informed the palace directly. The papers came through the lower administration and got buried. Cayden set down the document he was holding. He looked at Ryn. Ryn had a very specific expression on his face, the one that meant he was being careful about how he delivered information, because he was not sure how it would land. "Where is she now?" "Waiting room off the east corridor. The Greywood enforcers are with her." "Are they treating her well?" Ryn's pause was half a second too long. Cayden stood up. It was not a dramatic movement. It was simply the kind of movement that happened when a man with Caden's authority decided something needed his personal attention and stood up to go give it. But the effect on the room was immediate. Every wolf nearby straightened without knowing why. The air pressure seemed to shift. "Finish the afternoon schedule," Caden said to Rin, and walked off the platform. He moved through the palace with the certainty of someone who had walked every corridor of this building so many times that his feet knew the way, before his mind decided to go. The Ironvale Palace was not beautiful in the way that some pack seats were. It did not have decorative ceilings or silk hangings, or the kind of deliberate luxury that said, "Look at how much we have." It was built the way its current king governed. Solid, functional, clear in its purpose. Everything exactly where it needed to be and nothing where it did not. The waiting room off the east corridor was a plain space with 4 chairs, a window, and a guard posted outside the door. The guard straightened when he saw Caden coming and moved aside without being told. Caden opened the door. There were 3 people in the room. 2 of them were the Greywood enforcers, large men in the gray and brown colors of the Greywood pack, standing near the window with the particular posture of men who were trying to look casual and failing at it, because they had just realized the king himself had come to collect his delivery, and they had not expected that. The third person was sitting in one of the chairs with her hands folded in her lap and her back straight and her eyes on the floor in front of her, the way someone sits when they have been waiting for a long time and have decided not to waste energy by being tense about it. She was small and lean, with dark hair pulled back simply, and she was wearing clothes that were clean, but had been washed so many times they had lost whatever color they started with. Her hands, folded in her lap, were the hands of someone who had been doing hard physical work for years. She looked up when he came in. Their eyes met. Something detonated in the center of Caden's chest. It was not like anything he had felt in his life before. It was not pain exactly. It was not pleasure. It was more like the sensation of standing in a field when lightning strikes nearby. Not the strike itself, but the moment just before, when the air fills with electricity, and your body knows, on some level far below conscious thought, that the world is about to change. His wolf, who had been dormant for 11 years, and who Caden had concluded was simply gone, simply dead, simply burned away by the decision he had made at 17, his wolf lurched upright inside him, like an animal that had been sleeping, and heard something. The sound his wolf made, inside him, in that moment, was not sound exactly. It was recognition. Caden did not move. He did not show a single thing on his face. He had spent 9 years making sure his face showed exactly what he decided to show and nothing else, and that training did not fail him now, even as the thing inside his chest pulled toward this woman like a compass needle swinging north. He looked at the 2 enforcers. "You may leave," he said. The enforcers looked at each other. One of them started to say something about receiving confirmation of the transfer. Caden looked at him. The man stopped talking. They left. The woman in the chair had watched all of this without visible reaction. She was looking at him now with brown eyes that were careful and measuring. The eyes of someone who had learned to take stock of a new situation quickly, because the situations she found herself in were not always safe. "What is your name?" Caden asked. "Lena Ashford," she said. Her voice was steady. It surprised him, not because Omegas were expected to be unsteady, but because most people, when left alone in a room for an hour by enforcers, and then visited without warning by the king, were at least visibly unsettled. She was not unsettled, or if she was, she had folded it somewhere he could not see it. "How long have you been traveling?" 4 days. "Have you eaten today?" Something shifted in her expression. It was very small, but he caught it, a brief recalibration, as if the question had not been what she expected. "Not since this morning," she said. "A small meal before we arrived." Caden turned to the door, opened it, and spoke to the guard outside. The guard moved immediately. Caden came back into the room and stood near the window, and Lena Ashford sat in her chair and watched him with those measuring eyes. "The paperwork regarding your situation is in our lower administration," he said. "It should have come to my desk 6 months ago. It did not. That is an error on our part that I will address." She said nothing to that. She was waiting to find out what the error being addressed was going to mean for her. "You will be given a room in the staff quarters tonight. Tomorrow morning, once I have reviewed the documentation, we will discuss your situation properly." "What does properly mean?" she asked. It was a direct question, direct in a way that was not rude, but was also not deferential. She was not performing submission. She was not performing anything. She simply wanted to know. "It means you will know everything that is in those documents, and exactly where you stand," Caden said. "You have my word on that." She looked at him for a moment. "All right," she said. She said it the way someone says all right when they have learned that all right is the most useful thing to say, when a situation is still unclear, but they are going to keep their eyes open regardless. Caden left the room and walked back through the palace and up to his private study, where he stood at the window and looked out over Ironvale territory, and did not think about anything for approximately 30 seconds, which was all the time he was willing to give to the thing that had just happened in his chest. Then he went back to work. But Wren, who was waiting in the corridor outside the study when Caden returned, and who had gotten very good at reading Caden in the time they had known each other, looked at the king's face and saw something there that he had not seen in a very long time. Wren did not say a word about it. He simply filed it in the part of his mind where he kept the things that were going to matter later, and followed the king inside. The Ironvale pack had 4,300 wolves spread across a territory that bordered 4 others. It was not the largest pack on the continent, but it was one of the most stable, and stability, in a world where pack conflicts could destabilize an entire region, was worth more than size. Caden had built that stability deliberately, the way you build a wall, one stone at a time, each one placed with care, each one tested before the next one went on top of it. In the 9 years since he had taken the throne, he had settled 3 border disputes without bloodshed, renegotiated 5 trade agreements that had been bleeding Ironvale for a generation, restructured the pack's internal administration so that decisions moved faster, and the gap between what the king said and what actually happened in the pack's daily life was as small as it could be made. He was good at this. He was not good at it because he enjoyed it, though he did not hate it. He was good at it because he was the kind of person who, when he decided to do a thing, did it completely. There was no version of Caden Voss that did anything halfway. The decisions he made at 17 had been complete as well. He had been 17 when he felt the mate bond for the first time. Her name was Petra, and she was from a high-status family in the bordering pack to the west. She was beautiful and clever, and she had looked at him across a gathering and smiled, and his wolf had gone completely still and then completely wild, and he had known with a certainty that went all the way to the bone exactly what she was to him. And he had gone to her. He had told her. She had been kind about it, in the way that people who are doing something unkind are sometimes very careful to be kind about it. She had told him that she understood, that the bond was real for her too, that she felt it. And then she had told him that she was going to accept a match with the alpha heir of the Eastern Pack, because that match had been arranged before either of them knew the bond was there, and because the Eastern Pack had resources and connections that her family needed, and because a bond was a feeling, and a match was a strategy, and she had been raised to choose strategy. She had not apologized. He had not expected her to. He had walked away from that conversation and made a decision. He had been 17 years old, and he had made the cleanest, most complete decision of his young life. He decided that the mate bond was a biological fact and not an obligation. He decided that wanting something was not the same as having it, and that the distance between wanting and having was where most of the pain in the world lived. He decided to close that distance by removing the wanting. Over the years, he had gotten very good at it. He did not miss things. He did not need things. He ran his pack with a clarity and efficiency that his council admired, and his enemies respected, and at the end of each day he went to his private quarters, and he was alone, and the aloneness was simply a condition, like the weather. He had told himself, and believed, that his wolf was gone, that it had given up when he gave up, and that both of them were better for it. He stood at the window of his study that evening and looked out at the Ironvale territory, spreading dark and wide in the last of the daylight, and he told himself that what had happened in the East Corridor waiting room was a physiological reaction, a chemical response. His wolf had recognized something and responded to it, and that response was information, and he was going to evaluate the information calmly and make a decision about it the same way he made decisions about everything. He was going to look at the documents in the morning. He was going to settle the matter of Lena Ashford's situation clearly and fairly, and then he was going to send her on her way, or find her a reasonable placement, and that would be the end of it. He believed this. He believed it right up until he sat down at his desk to read the evening's correspondence, and found that he could not, for the first time in 9 years, fully concentrate, because somewhere below the level of conscious thought, something in him had already started paying attention to the fact that she was in the East Wing, and the East Wing was not very far from here, and she had said all right like she was keeping her eyes open regardless. He closed the correspondence folder. He opened it again. He read the first letter 3 times without absorbing a single word. Rin, who had come in to deliver a final report and found the king staring at a letter with the expression of a man who has encountered a problem he cannot solve by applying more precision to it, set the report on the corner of the desk and said nothing. He left very quietly, closed the door behind him, and stood in the corridor for a moment with a small, carefully private smile on his face. Then he went home. Lena Ashford had slept in worse places than the room they gave her in the East Wing. That was not a complaint. It was simply a fact she noted as she sat on the edge of the bed that first evening and looked around at the small, clean space, a wooden floor, a narrow window, a washstand with actual soap, a blanket that had not been patched. By the standards of the last 4 years of her life, this room was a kindness. She did not let herself feel relieved about it. She had learned that lesson. The moment you let yourself feel relieved, you stopped paying attention. And the moment you stopped paying attention was when situations changed without warning. She had been in enough situations that changed without warning. A young woman from the palace kitchen had brought her a meal an hour after she was shown to the room. A bowl of thick soup with bread, hot tea, and a small plate of fruit that looked ordinary but tasted like something that had been grown with actual care. The young woman's name was Polly, and she was perhaps 19, with red hair and the particular energy of someone who wanted to ask 100 questions, but was trying very hard to limit herself to the most important ones. "You came from Greywood?" Polly said, setting the tray down. "I came through Greywood," Lena said. There was a difference, and she found it mattered to her. Polly looked at her with bright, curious eyes. "Is it true they make the Omegas there work the night shifts in the cold storage?" "Among other things," Lena said. Polly made a face. She asked a few more careful questions while she arranged the tray, and Lena answered the ones that were harmless and deflected the ones that were not. And eventually Polly left with the cheerful energy of someone who had collected enough information to be interesting at tomorrow's breakfast. Lena ate slowly. The soup was better than anything she had eaten in months. She finished all of it, and the bread, and most of the fruit, and then she sat with the empty tray in front of her and let herself think about what tomorrow's conversation with the king might look like. She had been doing this for years, sitting at the end of each day and thinking through the next one, mapping the variables, identifying the things she could control and the things she could not. It was how she had survived the period after her rejection, when everything she thought she knew about her life had turned out to be wrong. She had been 18 when it happened. Her fated mate was a man named Oliver Crane, the Beta's son from the Greywood pack, where she had grown up. She had felt the bond the same way everyone said you felt it, like a key turning in a lock you did not know you had, like suddenly understanding a language you had been hearing all your life without knowing what it meant. Oliver had felt it too. She was certain of that. She had seen it on his face in the moment it happened, the way his eyes had gone wide, and then, very quickly, the way something else had moved across his face, something that looked like calculation. He had taken her aside that same evening. He had been careful and quiet about it, the way you are quiet about something when you do not want witnesses. He had told her that the bond was real for him, that he felt it, and then he had told her that he could not accept it. That an unmated Omega with no status, no family wealth, nothing but a dead father's unpaid debts, was not what his future required, that he was sorry. He had not looked sorry. He had looked like a man who had made a practical decision and was doing her the courtesy of explaining it to her clearly, which was a kind of courtesy she could have done without. The rejection had been formal, said in front of witnesses as pack law required. 3 days later, she had stood very straight through it. She had not cried. She had saved the crying for later, in a back room where no one could see it, and when she was done she had packed the small amount of things she owned and she had left Greywood on foot. That had been 4 years ago. She had worked in kitchens and laundries and storage facilities and farms across 3 different pack territories since then. She had been passed from creditor to creditor as her father's debt was sold and resold, and she had learned that when someone owns a debt you are responsible for, you are not exactly a prisoner, but you are not exactly free either. You are in the complicated middle space between those two things, and the only way out of it is to either pay the debt off, which was nearly impossible when you were being paid subsistence wages, or to find someone who would deal with it honestly. She did not know yet whether King Caden Voss was honest. She did not know what kind of man he was, beyond what she could read in a 5-minute encounter in a waiting room. What she had read was precise, controlled, not unkind, but not warm either. The kind of man who asked whether you had eaten because it was a logical question to ask about someone who had been in his building for hours, not necessarily because he was worried about her as a person. The kind of man who told you he would look at the documents and tell you where you stood, and who you almost believed when he said it. Almost. She would know more tomorrow. Until then, she could sleep. She had gotten good at sleeping in uncertain places. It was a skill she had never wanted to develop, but here she was. She lay down on the bed with her hands folded on her chest and closed her eyes, and she listened to the sounds of Iron Vale Palace settling around her, the distant footsteps of a guard patrol, the muffled wind outside the window, the slow creaking of old timber that meant the building was breathing the way all old buildings breathe, and she let herself go under. She woke at the sound of a knock on the door just after first light. It was not Polly. It was a man she had not seen before, slightly older, with a steady face and careful eyes. He introduced himself as Rin Cole, the king's beta, and said the king was ready to meet with her when she was. "When I'm ready," she said. "Not now?" "Whenever you are ready," Rin said. He said it the way someone says something they mean, without the particular politeness of someone who is saying it but means something else. She said she would need 10 minutes. She washed her face, pulled her hair back, changed into the only other set of clothes she had, which were not much better than the ones she had arrived in, and followed Rin through the palace corridors. The palace in the morning was different from the palace in the previous evening's dim light. She could see it more clearly now. The stone walls, the high ceilings, the way the morning sun came through the eastern windows and lay in long flat strips across the wooden floors. It was not a palace that was trying to impress anyone. It was a palace that was doing its job, which was to house a government, and it did that job without apology. Rin brought her to a room that was clearly a working office, not a throne room. There was a large desk covered in organized papers, 2 chairs opposite it, shelves of documents along one wall, and a window that looked out over the pack's central courtyard. It was the kind of room where actual decisions got made rather than performed. King Caden was already at the desk. He stood when she came in, which surprised her. He gestured to one of the 2 chairs across from him. She sat. He sat. Rin positioned himself slightly to the side, near the wall, in the place a beta stands when they are witnessing something official. Caden had a folder open in front of him. He had clearly been reading before she arrived, and the specific quality of attention he was giving the folder as he looked down at it again told her he had read it more than once. "I reviewed the documentation last night," he said, "and again this morning." "All right," she said. "The original debt was your father's. It was incurred 8 years ago in a trade arrangement with the Greywood Pack that went badly. The amount was significant. Your father died before it was settled, and by Greywood Pack law, the debt transferred to the next of kin, which was you." "I know this part," Lena said. He looked up. "I know you do. I am saying it aloud because I want you to know that I know the history, and am not going to pretend it is simpler than it is." She looked at him for a moment. "Go on." "The debt was sold 3 times between Greywood and Iron Vale," he said. "Each time it was sold, a fee was added. By the time it reached our lower administration, the amount had grown by 60% from the original figure. That escalation practice is legal in the territories where the debt was housed, but it is not a practice I permit within Iron Vale agreements." Lena's hands, which had been folded in her lap, went very still. "What does that mean for the amount?" she asked. "It means I am removing the escalation fees." He looked down at the folder. "It also means I am reviewing what work you have performed over the last 4 years in territories where your labor was applied against the debt, because in 2 of those 3 territories, the credit applied was below the legal minimum rate for labor service." Lena was quiet for a moment. She was doing the math in her head, because 4 years of doing things that did not pay well had made her very fast at math. "If the escalation fees are removed and the correct credit rate is applied," she said carefully, "what is the remaining debt?" Caden looked at the folder. "I am waiting for confirmation from the labor records in the 2nd territory, but based on what I have in front of me, the remaining debt after correct calculation is significantly lower than the figure you were likely told." "How significantly lower?" He paused for one moment. "Approximately 1/3 of what Greywood told you it was." Lena looked at the window, not at him. At the window. She had been told a number 4 years ago. She had been working toward that number, through kitchens and cold storage and laundry rooms, for 4 years. And now she was being told that the number she had been given was inflated, had always been inflated, and that a significant portion of those 4 years had been spent paying off fees that should never have been added. She had known something was wrong with the numbers. She had known it the way you know when something does not add up, but you cannot prove it because you do not have access to the original paperwork. She had asked, twice, to see the full documentation, and both times she had been told that the documents were held by the territory administration and were not her concern. "Are you all right?" Caden said. She looked at him. "Yes," she said. "I am angry, but I am all right." He regarded her with an expression she could not quite read. "The anger is appropriate," he said. I know. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The remaining amount is something that can be settled through a standard labor arrangement here, if you choose to stay. Or I can arrange for you to settle it through a payment plan, if you have somewhere you want to go. I am also looking at whether Greywood has any legal exposure for the improper calculation, in which case there may be a separate claim that runs in your favor." Lena sat with all of this for a moment. In 4 years, no one had said the words "in your favor" to her, in reference to anything related to the debt. The debt had been a thing that moved against her, always, an object pressing down on her from above. The idea of a claim running in her favor was so unfamiliar that she needed a second to let it become real. "You would pursue that?" she said. "A claim against Greywood?" "If the figures support it, yes." Greywood's alpha is not going to be pleased about that. Something moved in Caden's expression. It was brief, and it was not warm exactly, but it was something that her body read before her brain could name it. "Lord Greywood's pleasure is not a factor I consider when determining whether pack law has been followed," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. "I want to see the full documentation," she said. "All of it. The original debt papers, the transfer records, the labor credit calculations. Everything." "I expected you would," he said, and pushed a folder across the desk toward her. She reached for it. Their fingers did not touch. But she felt for one strange moment like something in the room had tilted slightly, the way a level tilts when the surface beneath it shifts a fraction. She opened the folder and started reading. She read for 40 minutes without stopping. Caden worked on his own correspondence. Rin stood near the wall with the stillness of a man who had learned how to be present without being noticed. The morning light moved slowly across the wooden floor. At the end of 40 minutes, Lena closed the folder. "You are right about the calculation," she said. "Yes. And you are right, that the labor credit rates in the second territory were below the legal minimum." "Yes. And the remaining amount, correctly calculated, is manageable." "It is," he said. "It is the kind of amount that should have been manageable 4 years ago, which is, I think, the accurate way to characterize what happened to you." Lena looked at the folder in her hands. She was not going to get emotional in front of this man, in this office, in this palace, where she did not yet know what her position was. She was not going to let 4 years of carefully managed feeling come apart in front of a king who had been, so far, decent to her, but who she did not yet know or trust. But she set the folder on the desk. "What do you need from me today?" she said. He looked at her. She got the feeling, again, that he was reading something in her face that she had not deliberately put there. "Nothing today," he said. "You have had 4 days of travel and a significant amount of information this morning. The staff quarters are available to you. You can have today to settle. We can speak again tomorrow about what arrangement would suit you best." She nodded. She stood. He stood. She was almost at the door when he said, "Miss Ashford." She turned. "The work you did over the last 4 years," he said. "I want to be clear. The problem was not your work. The problem was the system that was applied to it." She looked at him for a moment. "I know that," she said. "I knew it before I came here, but thank you for saying it." She left. She walked back through the corridor and did not let herself think too hard about what had just happened, because if she started thinking about it, she was going to feel things she was not ready to feel, and feeling things you were not ready to feel was a luxury for people who were in a stable situation, and she was not in a stable situation. Not yet. But possibly, and she made herself hold this word loosely, without weight, without hope attached to it yet. Possibly she was moving toward one. Behind her, in the office, Rin waited until the door had been closed for a full 30 seconds, before he looked at the king. Caden was looking at the door. "She read 40 minutes of financial documentation at sight," Rin said, "and found everything you found in 3 hours last night." "Yes," Caden said. "That is not a common skill." "No, it is not." Rin waited. Caden picked up a letter from his correspondence stack and opened it. "Close the door on your way out," he said. Rin closed the door on his way out, and stood in the corridor, and thought about the way the king had looked at the door instead of the letter, for 3 full seconds before he opened it. He had worked for Caden Voss for 6 years. In 6 years, he had never seen the king look at a door. The wolf inside Caden Voss did not sleep. That was the first thing he became aware of, in the days after Lena Ashford arrived at Ironvale. 11 years of dormancy, 11 years of quiet, and now, every morning when he woke up, the wolf was already awake. It was not loud about it. It was not pacing or clawing or doing any of the things he had read about in accounts of wolves who had been denied their mates for long periods. It was simply present, alert, oriented in a direction that Caden did not discuss with anyone, and tried not to think about when he had work to do. which was always. He had decided, on the second morning, that the most practical approach was to ignore the wolf's new awareness, the same way you ignore a sound outside a window at night. Acknowledge it exists, determine it is not a threat, and return to what you were doing. This worked reasonably well during the day. At night, when the palace went quiet, it worked less well, because the wolf had no interest in being redirected by paperwork. On the third morning after Lena's arrival, Kaden asked Rin to find her a position in the palace administration that matched her actual skills, rather than placing her in the kitchen or the laundry where she had been tentatively assigned. Rin had raised one eyebrow approximately 1 millimeter. What position did you have in mind? She can read financial documentation at sight. Put her with the accounts review team. They are 3 months behind on the territory tribute records. The accounts review team is restricted to permanent staff. Then arrange a temporary designation. Rin wrote something in his notebook. Is there a reason you reviewed her skill set so specifically? She demonstrated it in the meeting, Kaden said. Using capable people correctly is basic administration. Of course, Rin said, and wrote something else. Kaden looked at him. You have something to say. I have many things to say. Always, Rin said pleasantly. On this particular subject, I have nothing to say. Good. She will be grateful for the placement, I think, Rin said, moving toward the door. It is the kind of work that matches what she is actually capable of, which is not something she has had access to in a while. Kaden said nothing to that. Rin left. The accounts review office was on the second floor of the administrative wing, a room with 4 desks, 3 of which were occupied by permanent staff who had been working through the tribute record backlog, with the specific energy of people who knew they were behind, but could not go faster, because there was simply too much of it. Lena arrived there on the 3rd day of her stay, directed by a note from Rin that designated her as a temporary administrative assistant. The head of the accounts review team was a man named Gilbert Nash, 52, meticulous, deeply suspicious of anyone new, and firmly of the opinion that the tribute record backlog was the result of the previous administration's criminal disorganization, rather than any failure on his team's part. He looked at Lena when she arrived and asked, with carefully neutral courtesy, what her background was. She told him. He asked her 3 test questions about financial documentation. She answered all 3 correctly and caught an error in one of his sample calculations that he had not noticed was there. Gilbert looked at her for a long moment. Sit there, he said, pointing to the 4th desk. She sat there. By the end of the first day, she had cleared a stack of documents that would have taken Gilbert's team 2 days. By the end of the second, Gilbert had stopped looking at her with suspicion and started looking at her with the specific reverence that meticulous people develop for other meticulous people who are also fast. Kaden heard this from Rin, who heard it from Gilbert, who mentioned it in the weekly administrative report with the breathless enthusiasm of a man who had just discovered a solution to a problem that had been frustrating him for months. What Kaden did not hear from Rin, because Rin did not know it, was what happened on the afternoon of the 4th day. On the afternoon of the 4th day, Kaden was walking through the administrative wing on his way to a council meeting when he passed the open door of the accounts review office. He did not stop. He was not going to stop. He was on his way to a council meeting, and he had 8 minutes to get there, and he was the kind of person who arrived to things on time, because arriving late was a form of disrespect that he found structurally offensive. But his wolf noticed the room before he consciously did, and his feet slowed without his permission, and for one moment, one single, brief, inexcusable moment, he glanced through the open door. She was at her desk. She had a financial ledger open in front of her, and she was making notes in a margin, with a focused intensity that meant she was in the deep part of the work, the part where the world outside the page had temporarily ceased to exist for her. There was a small crease between her eyebrows. Her pen moved with short, precise strokes. She was completely unaware of him. He walked on. He arrived to the council meeting with 40 seconds to spare, and spent the next 2 hours determining Ironvale's position on a boundary renegotiation with the Western Pack, and he did not think about the accounts review office once. This was true. What was also true was that when the council meeting ended and his counselors were filing out and Rin was waiting by the door, Kaden said, without particular context, the accounts office. How is the backlog progressing? Rin did not smile. He had a rule about smiling at things the king said when the king would not appreciate being smiled at. Gilbert says they will be current within the week, he said. Good. He is very impressed with the temporary assistant. Miss Ashford is capable, Kaden said. Gilbert said capable was an inadequate word, and that he was considering whether there was a case for her designation being made permanent. Kaden stopped walking. That would require council approval and a position classification review. Yes, Rin said. Tell Gilbert to write it up formally if he thinks it is warranted. I will, Rin said. They walked on. Caden turned a corner. And then, because Rin had been his friend for 12 years and there were things you could only say to your oldest friend in the spaces between everything else, he said, quietly, without looking at Rin, I noticed the wolf. Rin did not say anything for a moment. They walked. I know, Rin said. I am not going to act on it. Rin was quiet again. They turned another corner. You do not have to decide that right now, Rin said. I have decided, Caden said. I decided this at 17, and the decision does not change because of a chemical response. A chemical response, Rin repeated. Yes. Rin walked beside him for a few more paces. Then he said, very carefully, in the tone he used when he was going to say something he knew Caden did not want to hear, but was going to say anyway, because Rin Cole was the beta of Ironvale, and his job was to say the true thing. A mate bond is not a chemical response, Caden. It is the wolf's recognition of the person it was made to find. That is not the same as chemistry. I know what it is, Caden said. Then you know that deciding against it is not the same as it not being real. I know what it is, Caden said again, and his voice was the kind of quiet that meant the conversation was over. Rin said nothing further, but he kept walking beside the king, close enough that their footsteps fell in the same rhythm, the way they had walked together since they were 20 years old, and he let the silence be what it was. Lena, for her part, was not thinking about the king. This was not entirely true, but it was the story she was telling herself, and she was finding it convincing enough to function. What she was thinking about was the work. The accounts review backlog was exactly the kind of problem she found satisfying. Large, complex, full of small errors that compounded each other over time, and entirely solvable if you were willing to start at the beginning and go through everything with patience and precision. She had always been good at this. It was the thing that, in a different life, she might have built a career from. In the life she had actually lived, it was something she had applied to laundry schedules and kitchen supply inventories, because those were the things she had been given. Gilbert was a good person to work with. He was fussy and occasionally difficult, but he was never careless, and he had the quality that she valued most in colleagues, which was that he actually wanted to get it right. He did not want to appear to have gotten it right. He wanted the actual correct answer, even when the actual correct answer meant admitting a mistake. On the afternoon of the fourth day, she was working through a set of tribute records from the Western Quarter when she found the discrepancy. It was not obvious. It was the kind of error that was designed not to be obvious. A rounding adjustment in a series of monthly tribute figures that, taken individually, looked like standard calculation variation. But Lena had grown up watching her father do the accounts for a small trading operation, and her father had been the kind of man who rounded things in particular directions when he was doing something he did not want examined too closely. She recognized the pattern. She pulled the previous year's records and cross-referenced them. Then she pulled the year before that. The discrepancy was there in all 3 years. Someone in the Western Quarter Territory Management had been systematically underreporting tribute figures, not by a large amount per entry, but over 3 years and across the whole quarter. The total was significant. She took the figures to Gilbert. Gilbert looked at them. He went very still. Then he picked up the records she had brought and went through them with his own pen. And when he was done, he looked at her with the expression of a man who has just realized that what he thought was a small problem is actually a large one. This goes to the king, he said. Yes, she said. Today. Yes. Gilbert took the records upstairs. Lena went back to her desk and continued working, because the work did not stop just because one part of it had become urgent. She found out later, from Polly, who had it from one of the household staff, who had it from a guard who stood outside the council chamber, that the meeting that followed Gilbert's report had lasted 3 hours, that 2 Western Quarter administrators had been suspended pending investigation, that the king had been, in Polly's breathless retelling, very quiet during the meeting, which was apparently more alarming to the council than if he had shouted. What Lena did not find out, because there was no one to tell her, was that the first question Caden had asked when Gilbert put the reports on his desk was not about the figures or the administrators. It was, who found this? And Gilbert had said, the temporary assistant, Miss Ashford. And Caden had looked at the reports for a moment and then said, with a quality in his voice that Gilbert could not quite name, make the permanent designation formal. The invitation came on the 6th day, a note delivered to the accounts office by a palace runner, addressed to her in handwriting that was precise and slightly angular, like someone who had been taught to write correctly, and had never stopped applying the same care to it. It said, "If you have no plans for dinner this evening, and would like a meal that is not the staff canteen, you are welcome to join me. It is not formal. 7 o'clock. Second floor east. The room with the blue door. Bring whatever you are reading." There was no signature. There did not need to be one. She read it twice. Then she put it in her pocket, and went back to the records she was reviewing, and she told herself, firmly, that an invitation for dinner from a king was a professional gesture, a reasonable thing for an employer to extend to a new member of staff, and that she was going to treat it as exactly that and nothing else. At 10 minutes to 7, she washed her hands and face, put on the same 2 clothes she had arrived with because they were all she had, and walked up to the second floor east corridor. The room with the blue door was not a dining room. It was a sitting room with 2 chairs and a small table and a fire going and a tray of food that was simple but good. Bread, cold meat, cheese, a pot of tea. The kind of meal someone puts together when they want food without wanting an occasion. Caden was already there. He was reading something. He looked up when she came in, and the look lasted 1 moment longer than a professional look usually did, and then he gestured to the other chair. She sat down. "You found the Western Quarter discrepancy," he said. "Yes." Gilbert's team had been through those records twice. "They were looking for accounting errors," she said. "I was looking for patterns. Different question, different result." He looked at her the way he had looked at her in the waiting room on the first day, with the quality of attention she had not yet fully gotten used to, the kind that was not performing interest but simply was interested, without apology. "Where did you learn to look for patterns like that?" he said. "My father," she said. "He was not a good man in many ways. He was a very good accountant. I learned what to look for by watching what he tried to hide." She had not meant to say that much. It came out cleaner than she expected, without the weight she usually had to manage around it. Caden did not follow it up. He did not ask about her father or the ways he was not good. He simply received the information and moved on, the way someone moves on when they understand that the thing you said was enough and more is not theirs to ask for. "The permanent designation will go through the council review next week," he said instead. "Gilbert is writing the recommendation. It is a formality at this point." She poured tea into the cup in front of her. "You pushed it through." "I approved Gilbert's request." "That is the same thing in your pack," she said. A corner of his mouth moved. It was the smallest possible version of a smile, and it was there and gone so fast she might have imagined it. "Yes," he said, "it is." She held her cup and looked at the fire and thought about the fact that she was sitting across from the Alpha King of Ironvale, having a simple dinner in a room with a blue door, and that nothing about the last 6 days had gone the way anything in the last 4 years had gone, and she did not know what to do with that information, except keep her eyes open and stay careful. She stayed for 2 hours. They talked about the tribute system and the Western Quarter investigation and the structural problems in interterritory debt transfer law, and then they somehow ended up talking about books, and she mentioned the one she had been trying to find for 3 years that was not available in any library she had been near, and he stood up and went to the shelf on the far wall and came back with it. He handed it to her. She looked at it. "You can keep it," he said. "I have read it. I cannot take a book from you." "You can. It is a book, not a kingdom." She looked at the book in her hands. She looked at him. His expression was even and calm, and giving nothing away except the fact that he meant it. She put the book under her arm. "Thank you," she said. "Good night, Miss Ashford," he said. "Good night," she said, and went down the stairs and back through the East Wing corridor with a book under her arm, and an unsettled feeling in her chest that she could not decide whether to examine or ignore, and she chose, for now, to ignore it, and she almost succeeded. The Council of Ironvale had 12 members. 11 of them were practical people, with practical concerns, and enough experience in pack governance to know when to push back, and when to let a matter run its course. The 12th was Lord Harlan Vex of the Greywood Pack, who was not technically a council member, but who had a seat at inter-territory meetings by virtue of a standing agreement that predated Caden's rule by 30 years. Harlan Vex was 60 years old, broad in the chest, with white hair and a way of speaking that had the surface quality of reasonableness and the underlying texture of a man who had spent decades getting what he wanted by sounding like he was being fair. He arrived at Ironvale without prior notice on the morning of Lena's 10th day in the palace. Caden was in the middle of a working session with 3 of his administrators when Rin appeared in the doorway with an expression that said the thing he was about to say was going to require the room to be cleared. Caden thanked the administrators, watched them file out, and looked at Rin. Vex. Rin said, Caden was quiet for a moment. How many men? 8. Plus himself. They are in the outer courtyard. Did he send word ahead? No. Caden stood up from the desk. He straightened his jacket, an automatic gesture, and picked up the pen he had been using and set it precisely in its holder. Tell Lord Vex that I will see him in the East Reception Hall in 20 minutes, he said. Offer his men food and water and show them where to wait. Do not tell him we know why he has come. Rin nodded. Do you know why he has come? Approximately, Caden said, and walked out. He used the 20 minutes to walk a circuit of the upper floor corridor, which was a thing he did when he needed to think. It was not restless pacing. It was deliberate, rhythmic movement that cleared the surface of his mind, the way wind clears smoke. Not by forcing it away, but by giving it space to disperse. Harlan Vex had come for Lena Ashford. This was almost certain. The Greywood pack had lost its leverage over her the moment she came into Ironvale, and Vex was not the kind of man who let go of leverage without contesting it. He would have found out, through whatever channels he used for information, that Ironvale was reviewing the debt calculation. He might even know about the Western Quarter investigation, which was related to the Greywood supply chain and therefore directly connected to Vex's interests. There were several possible approaches. Caden sorted through them during his walk and arrived at the East Reception Hall with a clear understanding of which approach he intended to use. Harlan Vex was already in the hall, standing near the window. His 8 men distributed along the walls in the particular posture of people who are trying to fill a room without looking like they are trying to fill it. Vex himself turned when Caden entered, and his expression was warm in the careful way of a man who has prepared his expression in advance. King Caden, Vex said. Forgive the unannounced visit. I hope I am not interrupting anything important. You are interrupting a great many things, Caden said pleasantly, but that is what inter-territory visits do, and we accommodate them. He sat, and he did not offer Vex the opposite seat immediately, which was a very small omission that Vex would register without being able to object to. Then he gestured to it, a moment later, as if he had simply been getting settled. Please sit. Vex sat. His 8 men continued to fill the walls. Caden's own guard, 6 of them, stood in positions that were precisely arranged relative to the exits. I have come about a personal matter, Vex said, which I hope can be handled simply between us, without the formality of a written petition. I find that personal matters between territories benefit from written record, Caden said. It prevents misunderstanding later. Vex's warm expression did not change. Of course, I am simply saying that I hope we can resolve this over a conversation before it becomes a document. Tell me the matter, Caden said. A woman came to Ironvale several days ago. She arrived with 2 of my enforcers, in connection with a debt arrangement. I understand there have been some questions raised about the documentation. There have been some questions about the calculation methodology, yes, Caden said. I was told the calculation was standard, Vex said. I would be happy to provide the original paperwork to clarify any confusion. We have the original paperwork, Caden said. Our analysis is complete. Vex looked at him. Then you will understand that the debt is a Greywood debt, and that the woman's labor arrangement was a Greywood labor arrangement, and that while Ironvale has been kind to host her temporarily, there is no legal basis for Ironvale to retain jurisdiction over the matter. Ironvale has full jurisdiction, Fern Caden said. From the moment the debt was transferred to us, that transfer was completed. Miss Ashford is in Ironvale territory, under Ironvale authority, and any questions about the calculation are Ironvale's to resolve. She is Greywood born, Vex said. His voice had shifted slightly, losing a layer of warmth. She is an unmated Omega with no pack designation, Caden said. Her birth pack is not a legal claim on her status. She has no obligations to Greywood that we have not already identified and are in the process of addressing. Vex was quiet for a moment. You have been generous with her, he said, with a tone that turned generosity into something mildly suspicious. I have been accurate with her, Caden said. The figures in the debt documents were wrong. Correcting wrong figures is not generosity, it is basic administration. King Caden, Vex said, leaning forward slightly. I am going to speak plainly, because I think we are both men who prefer that. Please, Caden said. The woman has been in your palace for less than 2 weeks. You have placed her in a permanent administrative position. You have reviewed her case personally. You have opened an investigation into tribute records that are connected to Greywood operations. I am not suggesting any wrongdoing, but I am suggesting that the level of personal attention this case is receiving is unusual. He said unusual with the precise inflection of a man who means something else entirely, but has chosen a word he cannot be challenged on. Caden looked at him for one long, even moment. "Lord Vex," he said, "you have come to my territory uninvited to suggest that I have shown improper interest in a woman whose financial documentation was mishandled before she arrived here. I am going to tell you something plainly, since you prefer that. I am going to continue reviewing the debt calculation. I am going to continue the tribute investigation. And I am going to continue addressing Miss Ashford's situation according to the laws of Ironvale as I understand them. If you have a formal legal objection to any of those actions, you may submit it in writing to my legal counsel, and we will respond within the standard 30-day window. If you do not have a formal legal objection, then I am not sure what else we have to discuss today." Vex's warm expression had not left his face, but it had stiffened slightly, like a mask that has been worn too long and begun to pull at the edges. "I would like to speak with her," Vex said. "As a courtesy." "She is not available," Caden said. "Not available today, or—" "She is a member of Ironvale administrative staff," Caden said. "She has work. I am not going to pull a staff member from their duties for a courtesy visit from a guest." Vex looked at him. "You are being very protective for a man who has no legal claim on her." The room went very still. Caden did not change his expression. He did not tighten. He did not shift. He simply maintained the same even quality of presence that he maintained in every difficult conversation, and he said, quietly, "Lord Vex, you are welcome in Ironvale for 24 hours, as inter-territory courtesy allows. My household will feed your men and provide them shelter for tonight. In the morning, we will see you out." He stood. "Enjoy the hospitality of Ironvale." The conversation was over. Vex knew it. He stood, and his expression was still almost warm, but the calculation behind it was visible now, a small bright point of it showing through. "Thank you for your time, King Caden," he said. Caden nodded and walked out. He was in the corridor outside when Rin fell into step beside him. "How did it go?" Rin said. "As expected," Caden said. "He will not push legally. He does not have grounds, but he will look for another angle." "What angle?" "I do not know yet. That is what concerns me." Rin was quiet for a moment. He used the word protective. "Yes, you did not deny it." "Denying things to Vex would require explaining myself to him," Caden said. "I do not explain myself to him." They walked on. Rin turned this over in his mind. "She should know he was here," Rin said and stopped walking. He turned to look at Rin, not sharply, but with attention. "Why?" "Because she is the subject of the visit," Rin said, "and she has a right to know who is asking about her and why. She is not a file we manage. She is a person who has been in situations she did not fully understand the parameters of before, and she told you in the first meeting that she wanted to know everything. I think she meant it generally, not just about the debt figures." Caden was quiet. "She did mean it generally," he said after a moment. "Then she should know." Caden turned and walked in the direction of the administrative wing. Ryan did not follow him. He had learned, years ago, the specific cases in which following was not what the king needed. Lena was at her desk when Caden knocked on the open door of the accounts office. Gilbert looked up first, with the expression of a man who registers that the king has appeared in his doorway and is trying to decide whether this is about the tribute investigation or something else. The other two clerks straightened very quickly. Lena looked up last, from a record she was in the middle of. "Miss Ashford," Caden said, "when you have a moment." Gilbert immediately said that of course she could take a moment now, because Gilbert was not going to be the person who made his staff member make the king wait. Lena set down her pen and came to the door. Caden stepped back into the corridor so they were not having this conversation in front of an audience. She looked at him. His expression was the same as always, even, clear, not readable in the way that people's faces were usually readable. But she had been watching him for 10 days now, the way you watch someone when you are still deciding what to make of them, and she had begun to develop a sense for the very small variations beneath the surface. He was not relaxed. "Harlan Vex came this morning," he said. She went very still. "From Greywood." "Yes." "Is he still here?" "He will be here until tomorrow. He is being shown inter-territory courtesy." She was quiet for a moment. "What did he want?" "Officially, to discuss the debt documentation in practice, to determine whether he had any grounds to reassert Greywood's claim on your situation. Does he?" "No," Caden said. "The transfer to Ironvale was completed and is legally sound. He has no grounds." She looked at the floor for a moment. When she was doing the things she did when she was processing information, not visibly reacting, just going very quiet and still while the information settled into its correct place in her mind. "He asked to speak with me," she said. "It was not a question. She had simply worked it out. Yes. And you said no. I said you were not available. She looked up at him. What does he actually want, Caden? She used his name. She had not done that before. It happened without her planning it, without her hearing herself do it until it was already said. And then she was aware of it very clearly, but it was too late to take it back, and she decided not to try. He did not appear to mind. He wants to know why this case is receiving the attention it is receiving, Caden said, and he wants, if possible, to use whatever answer he finds to his advantage. What answer would he find? Caden looked at her for a moment. His expression did something. The smallest possible adjustment. The kind of thing that would have been invisible to anyone who had not spent 10 days paying attention to him. I do not know what he would conclude, Caden said. I know what I would prefer him not to conclude. She waited. He looked at her. I am handling this, he said. I want you to know that you do not have to manage it. She looked at him with the measuring eyes he had noticed on the first day. I am not worried about managing it, she said. I am worried about understanding it. Those are different things. Yes, he said. They are. He was quiet for a moment. Avoid the east courtyard today. He is keeping his men there. You do not need to be in proximity to anyone from Greywood. All right, she said. She went back into the office. She sat down at her desk. She picked up her pen. Gilbert was not looking at her, which was how she knew he had been watching the whole thing. She put the pen down and looked at her hands on the desk, and she thought about Harlan Vex, who had sold her father's debt, and sold it again, and sent enforcers to collect her, and now came personally to inquire about her. And she thought about the word protective that Vex had presumably used about Caden, because she knew Vex, and she knew the moves he made, and she could reconstruct approximately what he had said, and what it had been aimed at. And then she thought about Caden, who had said, I do not know what he would conclude, and I know what I would prefer him not to conclude. And she sat with that for a long, quiet moment. She picked up her pen again. She worked for another 3 hours. She was very thorough and very precise, and she did not make a single error. But a part of her, the part that had been paying attention to the wrong thing from the beginning, was still sitting with that sentence. What he would prefer him not to conclude. She was not 17 years old. She was 22, and she had been through enough that she did not make assumptions. She did not let herself run ahead of the evidence. She had learned what happened when you did that. But she had also learned, in 4 years of reading other people's figures, that the pattern was usually there if you looked for it. And she was looking. And the pattern she was seeing was not one she had expected to find. She set the pen down at the end of the day and helped Gilbert lock the office and walked back to her room. And she sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the book Caden had given her, which was on the side table, and she thought very carefully about what she was going to do with what she was starting to understand. She did not come to a conclusion that night, but she came to a beginning of one, which was enough. Harlan Vex left Ironvale the next morning as expected. What he left behind was more interesting than his presence had been. Rin found out about it 3 days later, through the information network that every beta worth anything maintained in the territories surrounding their pack. A web of small contacts, supply route conversations, passing merchants who noticed things and mentioned them to the right people. Vex had sent a letter, not to Ironvale, to the Council of Territory Authorities, the interpack governing body that handled disputes between packs and had the power, in extreme cases, to investigate an Alpha King's conduct toward members of another pack's bloodline. The letter was not, technically, an accusation. It was a concerned inquiry. It used words like appropriate oversight and well-being verification, and a kind of language that sounded reasonable and meant something pointed. It suggested that a previously Greywood-affiliated Omega had been placed in unusually close proximity to the Ironvale King, under circumstances that might benefit from independent review. Rin read the copy his contact had obtained and brought it to Caden without comment, because the comment was obvious, and Caden did not need to hear it from Rin. Caden read the letter standing at his desk, which was how he read things he was not sure he wanted to sit down with. He read it twice, then he set it on the desk and stood looking at it for a moment. He has no grounds for a formal investigation, Rin said. The letter reads as precautionary concern, not an allegation. The council will acknowledge it and file it. Unless something gives them an actual basis to act, it will sit in a file and collect dust. Unless something gives them a basis, Caden said. Yes. Caden picked the letter up and looked at it again. He is being careful. The letter alone does nothing. But it is a record. If anything happens in the future that can be connected to it, the record will make it look like he had concerns long before. It is a setup for a future claim, Rin said. Yes. Caden set the letter down. What is his actual goal, do you think? Rin sat down in one of the chairs across from the desk. He had known Caden long enough to know when he was being asked to think out loud rather than simply report. Vex is not interested in Lena Ashford as a person, he said. She was leverage. She was a debt he could sell and a labor source he could move around. Now that she is in Ironvale and the debt is being corrected in her favor, she stops being either of those things. He has lost a resource. What does he gain by making trouble? Two things, possibly. First, if he can cast doubt on the legitimacy of the debt correction, he might be able to reinstate his financial claim in some form. Second, and I think more likely, if he can demonstrate that your personal interest in this situation compromises Ironvale's impartiality, he can challenge the Western Quarter Tribute investigation. That investigation implicates Greywood's supply chain operations. He needs it to stop. Caden was quiet for a long moment. He walked to the window and stood looking out. The investigation continues, he said. Yes. And the debt correction stands. Yes. Then he has nothing. He has the letter, Rin said, and he has the question it plants, which is whether this case is being handled correctly, or whether it is being handled with a personal interest that distorts the outcome. Caden turned from the window. The case is being handled correctly. I know that, Rin said. The Council of Territory authorities will need to know it too, if this ever moves further. Then they will know it. Rin looked at him. Caden. If you ask me to say plainly what I think, I will say it. Say it. Vex is going to keep looking for leverage because he has nothing else. The leverage he is most likely to find is the one that is most obvious to anyone who has watched you for the last 2 weeks. You do not need to make a decision about that today, but I think you need to stop treating it as a thing that does not exist, because it exists, and other people can see it, and if Vex can see it, he is going to use it. Caden said nothing. She is your mate, Rin said quietly. She has been your mate since the moment she walked into that waiting room, and your wolf has not been dormant since, and you know all of that, and I know you have a reason for the wall, and I know the reason is real, but a wall that you are already looking over is a different thing from a wall that is working. Jaden looked at his beta. He said nothing for a long time. Then he said, "Thank you, Rin," which was the thing he said when he had heard what he needed to hear and needed time to do something with it. Ren stood. He left the study and closed the door behind him. Caden sat down at his desk and put his hands flat on the surface of it, the way he sometimes did when he needed to feel something solid and real. The desk was made of dark wood from the old Ironvale forest, 4 inches thick, almost indestructible. His grandfather had worked at this desk. His father had worked at it before him. He had sat at it since he was 22 years old, and made every consequential decision of his adult life from behind it. He thought about a girl at 17 who had looked at a bond and chosen something else. He thought about what it had felt like to walk away from that, the specific quality of it, the way he had closed something in himself very precisely and thoroughly, and told himself it was done. He thought about whether closing something very precisely and thoroughly was the same as killing it, and whether you could decide something was dead and be wrong about that for 11 years. He picked up the letter from Vex and wrote a response to the Council of Territory authorities that was 2 paragraphs long, factually complete, and utterly unassailable. He documented the debt calculation review, the labor credit correction, the basis for Lena's administrative placement, the Western Quarter investigation and its connection to Greywood operations. He made everything visible, clearly and plainly, because the only way to make Vex's letter useless was to ensure there was nothing in the situation that could look unclear. He sent the letter. Then he went back to work. What Caden did not know, in those days, was that on the other side of the palace, something else was shifting. Lena had not gone looking for the information. She had found it the way she found most things, through attention, through the patterns and small details, through the particular skill she had developed for understanding situations that people were not fully telling her about. It was Polly who first said something, on the 12th day, while bringing Lena tea in the early morning before the accounts office opened. Polly had the habit of sharing palace information the way she shared everything, with enthusiasm and without strategy, which was why Lena had always found her more honest than most. "Everyone in the household is talking about you," Polly said. Lena looked at her. "Talking about me how?" Polly poured the tea and made a face that meant she was trying to decide how to say this. "It is not bad talk," she said. "It is more curious. The staff has been in Ironvale long enough to notice the things that are different about the king lately." "What things?" "He laughs," Polly said. "Not often, and not in public. But the study guard says he has heard it twice, coming through the door. And the kitchen staff says the king has asked 3 times in 2 weeks what the evening's canteen menu is, which he has never done before in the 4 years that Cook has been here. Because the king eats in his rooms and has never once asked about what the rest of the staff is eating. Lena was quiet. And, Polly said, with the particular energy of someone saving the most interesting thing for last, Lord Vex came and left without getting what he wanted, which has never happened before. Lord Vex always gets what he wants, or at least goes away with something. He went away with nothing. You know why he came? Lena said. You, Polly said simply. Everyone knows it was about you. Lena looked at the tea in her cup. She thought about that. Polly, she said carefully, what are people actually saying? Polly looked at her with those bright, honest eyes. They are saying the king is different since you came, and they are saying it does not look like nothing. Lena was very still for a moment. Then she said, Thank you for the tea, Polly. And Polly, who was young but not insensitive, heard the shift in tone and left without asking more questions. Lena sat for a while with the tea going cold in her hands. She was not a person who ignored information. She was not someone who told herself comforting stories about what was happening around her when the evidence pointed to something else. She had done that at 18, when she had told herself that Oliver Crane's calculation would not win, that the bond would matter more than strategy, and she had been wrong about that in a way that had cost her 4 years. She had sworn, after Oliver, that she would not be wrong like that again. She would look at what was actually there, not what she wanted to be there. So she looked at what was actually there. A king who had reviewed her case personally, who had placed her in a position that suited her actual skills, who had written off Greywood's escalation fees and opened an investigation that protected her interests, who had given her a book, who had invited her to dinner and talked to her for 2 hours like she was someone worth talking to, who had stood between her and Vex without being asked. She was looking at this very carefully. She was trying to be accurate about it. She was trying to resist the version of it that felt like what she wanted, and stay with the version that was true. The version that was true looked, from where she was sitting, a great deal like something she had not expected to encounter again. Not in a palace, not from a man like this, not from an alpha king who was, by every account she had ever heard, someone who had not shown this quality of attention to anyone, about anything that was not pack governance, in the entire 9 years of his reign. The version that was true, if she was being accurate about what she was seeing, looked like a mate bond operating on the other side of a very deliberate wall. Lena had been the Omega on the wrong side of that calculation once. She knew exactly what it looked like. She knew the difference between a man who was going to choose his bond and a man who had already decided against it and was simply being very well-mannered about the distance. The difference was the wall. She sat with this for a long time. The question was not whether the bond was there. The question was what she was going to do about being in a palace where the bond was there. But the person on the other side of it had a history of choosing the wall. And whether that was a situation she could be in, with the particular history she had, without it costing her something she could not afford to lose. She went to the accounts office, and she did her work. She was precise and thorough, and she did not make mistakes. At the end of the day, Gilbert told her the backlog was fully cleared, that for the first time in 3 years Ironvale's tribute records were current, and that the formal recommendation for her permanent placement had been approved by the council without objection. She thanked him. She meant it. She went home to her room. She sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the book on the side table. She picked it up and held it for a moment. Then she put it back down, and she thought about Oliver Crane standing in front of witnesses and choosing strategy, and she thought about a waiting room, and a man who had stood in the doorway and sent 2 large enforcers out of the room without raising his voice, and she thought about all right, she had said, and what she had meant by it. She had meant, I am watching, I am not going to assume, I am going to keep my eyes open and see what this is, and I will know when I know. She knew a little more than she had. Not enough, but more. She opened the book and read until the room went dark, and Polly came to light the lamp, and then she read some more. 3 weeks into Lena's time at Ironvale, something shifted. It was not a dramatic shift, it did not announce itself. It happened the way most real changes happen. So gradually, that by the time either of them noticed it, it had already been going on for a while. The dinners continued, not every evening. 3 or 4 times a week, the note would come, or Caden would stop by the accounts office at the end of the day and ask, with the careful casualness of someone who was not sure they were allowed to ask, whether she had plans. She rarely had plans. She would go upstairs, to the room with the blue door, and they would eat whatever simple thing had been put on the tray, and they would talk. They talked about many things, about pack administration, because Caden was always thinking about pack administration, and found that she had opinions about it that were unexpectedly useful, about the tribute investigation, which had expanded to include 2 other Western Quarter administrators, and was beginning to reveal a pattern of misreporting that had apparently been going on for longer than the 3 years the initial documents showed, about the interterritory debt transfer laws, which were genuinely archaic and which Lena had some very clear thoughts about, informed by 4 years of being on the wrong end of them. They talked about other things too, about books, which they both read in the same focused way, extracting from them not just the story but the specific mechanics of how the story worked, about the difference between a rule that was fair and a rule that was merely consistent, about the Iron Veil Forest, which Caden knew in the specific way someone knows a place they have walked through alone many times, and which he described in a way that made her want to see it. The conversations were easy, in a way that was itself a kind of information. Lena had not had easy conversations with many people in 4 years. She had had useful conversations, careful conversations, conversations she managed for specific outcomes. She was good at those. What she had not had was a conversation where the time passed without her tracking it, where she looked up and found that 2 hours had gone while she was talking, and felt, not depleted from the managing of it, but simply full, in the way you feel full after something good to eat. She was aware that this was something she did not allow herself to be too specific about what it was. Caden, on his side of the Blue Door room, was dealing with a more specific problem. The wolf had opinions. This was the part he had not anticipated. In the 11 years when he had told himself the wolf was gone, he had remembered the wolf as a young thing, intense, unsophisticated, wanting things with a directness that made the wanting itself feel like a problem to be solved. What he had not anticipated was the adult version of it, the wolf that was 11 years older, and had more patience, and made its point not by clawing at him but by simply being present, being awake, orienting, constantly, in one direction. The wolf did not storm the wall. It stood on one side of it and waited. This was, Caden found, considerably harder to manage than the alternative would have been. A wolf that was loud and demanding gave you something to push back against. A wolf that was quiet and certain did not give you an argument to win. It just waited, and every evening when Caden walked into the room with the Blue Door and Lena was there already, the wolf simply settled in the way something settles when it has been found, and the settling was its own kind of pressure. He was not, he told himself, crossing any line. The dinners were conversation. The conversations were professional and personal in the way that people who worked together and respected each other were personal. He was not behaving incorrectly. He was not making promises he had not made, or reaching for something that was not his to take. The wall was still there. He was still on the correct side of it. But the wall was made of a decision he had made when he was 17 years old about a different person in a different situation. And decisions, he was beginning to understand, aged. They did not always hold their original shape. They did not always mean exactly what you meant when you made them. He did not examine this thought too closely. He filed it, the way he filed other things that required more time than he currently had, and he went on. It was on a Tuesday evening, in the 4th week, that the pattern broke. They were sitting in the Blue Door room. The food was mostly done. Lena was holding her teacup and he was leaning back in his chair with the relaxed quality that had been appearing more often in the last few weeks. The quality that looked like him without the governance on top of it. And they had been talking about a ruling he had made that afternoon in the assembly hall. "You gave the wrong judgment," she said. He looked at her. "I beg your pardon." "The boundary dispute. The family in the Northern Quarter. You gave the ruling to the elder family based on tenure of occupation. But the junior family had paperwork showing a boundary adjustment from 12 years ago. If that adjustment holds, tenure of occupation is irrelevant. The junior family's paperwork was filed with the wrong administrative office," he said. "It does not legally constitute a valid boundary claim. The filing error was made by the administrative office at the time, not by the family," she said. "I checked. The family submitted the paperwork correctly. The routing error was internal." He went still. "You checked." "Gilbert had the archive records for that district. It is part of the tribute documentation." She looked at him steadily. "The family has been carrying an incorrect ruling for 4 years because of a filing error that was not their fault." The quiet in the room was different from the quiet they usually sat in. This was a particular kind of stillness, the kind that meant someone was recalculating something important. "Why did you not bring this to the assembly before the ruling?" he said. "I did not have the records until an hour ago," she said. "Gilbert and I were reviewing the North Quarter archives this afternoon, and I found the original paperwork cross-referenced in a supply record. It was buried." She paused. "I am bringing it to you now." He sat forward. His elbows went to his knees. He looked at the floor for a moment. "You found a 4-year-old administrative error that reversed a ruling I made today. he said. Yes. In a supply record. Cross-referenced in a supply record, she said. It is the kind of thing that is easy to miss if you are not looking for patterns. He was quiet for a moment, then he looked up at her. Do you always do this? Do what? Find the thing that everyone else has walked past. She was quiet for a moment, uncertain whether this was a question or something else. It is what my work is, she said, finding the discrepancies. That is not what I mean, he said. She looked at him. He was looking at her in a different way than he usually did. Not the governor's look, not the careful professional attention. This was something else, something that was less managed. I do not know what you mean, she said carefully. He looked at her for a moment longer than he usually did. Then he sat back and picked up his teacup, and the look shifted back into something more ordinary. I will reopen the ruling tomorrow, he said. The family will be notified. The records will be corrected. All right, she said. They finished the tea. The evening ended as the evenings usually ended, with her going back down the corridor and him staying behind to finish whatever was left on his desk. But as she walked back to the East Wing, she was turning that look over in her mind, the one that had been there for a moment before he pulled it back. She was turning it over the way you turn something over when you are trying to determine its weight. It was a look she had not been expecting. Not because she had not noticed the way he looked at her sometimes, in ordinary moments, with that quality of attention, but because this one was different. This one had not been managed first. It had just been there, unfiltered, for one moment, before he caught it. She went to her room. She sat on the bed. She thought about that moment for longer than she should have, and then she put the book on her lap and made herself read, and she was mostly successful. The event that changed things between them was not a dramatic one. It happened on a Friday afternoon, 8 days later, in the Eastern Courtyard, and it was unplanned and ungoverned in a way that almost nothing in Caden's daily life was allowed to be. He was crossing the Eastern Courtyard on his way from the administrative wing to the council building when he heard the sound. It was not an alarming sound, just the specific quality of a group of people who were doing something that was affecting one of them in a way that was uncomfortable. He had been a king long enough to know that sound, and to go toward it rather than away from it. There were 4 men in the corner of the courtyard, near the wall. 3 of them were members of the palace grounds crew, large and weathered from outdoor work. The 4th was Lena. She was standing with her back to the wall, not cornered exactly, but the 3 men were between her and the exit, and their posture was the particular posture of men who were not threatening precisely, but were also not making way. One of them was talking to her. She was not responding. She had that look on her face, the precise, still look she got when she was managing something carefully. Caden arrived at a pace that was not a run but was not slow either. All 3 men turned when he appeared. They were not, he could see in an instant, dangerous men. They were men who had said something they should not have said and were now trying to decide how much trouble they were in. The one who had been talking to Lena took a step back. King Caden, that man said, with the voice of someone who has just realized they have made a significant miscalculation. Caden looked at him for one moment. Then he looked at Lena. Are you all right? He said. Yes, she said. The word was steady and level. She was fine. She was also, he could see, angry. In the quiet way she was angry when something had happened that she had chosen to manage herself rather than make an issue of. He looked at the 3 men. You work grounds, he said. Yes, sire, the same man said. Your names. They gave their names. Caden stored them. Report to the head groundskeeper this afternoon, he said. He will assign you a new work area. His voice was even. It was not loud. It had the quality of something said by a person who does not need to be loud, because the weight behind the voice is sufficient. Now, he said, and they moved. They were gone in seconds. He turned back to Lena. She was looking at him with those brown eyes, and the anger in her face had shifted slightly into something else that he could not immediately name. What happened? He said. Nothing significant, she said. Some comments. I was handling it. I know you were handling it, he said. I asked what happened. She was quiet for a moment. One of them knew I came in with the Greywood enforcers. He had a particular idea about what that meant. She said this in the flat way. She said things she did not want to spend a lot of feeling on. The comments were the kind that follow from that idea. Caden's jaw moved. One small adjustment. I will speak to the head groundskeeper about the appropriate standards of conduct for palace staff. You do not have to do that on my account, she said. I am doing it on Ironvale's account, he said. This is my palace. It is going to operate accordingly. She looked at him. The something else in her expression settled into a specific shape that was not quite the look she usually gave him. It was more open, more unguarded. Thank you, she said. You are welcome. he said. And then, because he was standing very close to her in a corner of the eastern courtyard, and his wolf was very awake, and he had just seen the expression on those men's faces, and the expression on her face, before she saw him, he did something he had not planned. He said, "Walk with me." She looked at him. "Where?" "The path behind the administrative wing. It goes along the edge of the Ironvale forest. I have not been on it in a while." He paused. "I described it to you once." She looked at him for a moment. "Yes," she said. They walked. Not quickly, not with any particular destination. The path went along the tree line where the Ironvale forest began, and the trees were old and very tall, and the afternoon light came through them sideways in long pale lines. He talked about the forest, about the places in it that he knew from years of walking it alone. She listened, and then she started asking questions, real questions, the kind that meant she was actually interested and not just being polite. And he answered them. And somewhere in the middle of that, the conversation stopped being about the forest and became something more like the conversations they had in the Blue Door room. Easy in the way those conversations were easy, with the time moving in a different way. They walked for nearly an hour. By the time they came back to the palace, the light had gone gold and low. He stopped at the door of the administrative wing. "Thank you for the walk," he said. "You suggested it," she said. "You agreed to it," he said. She looked at him for one moment, just one, with that open expression. Then she smiled, which was a thing she did not do often, and which, when it happened, was the kind of thing that made the air in the vicinity feel briefly different in quality. "Good evening," she said, and went inside. Caden stood in the doorway for a moment. The wolf was very still. Not still in the way of something waiting, still in the way of something that was, for the first time in a very long time, at peace. He went back to work. But when Rin stopped by the study at the end of the day and looked at the king's face, he did not say a word about what he saw there, because some things did not need to be said. They just needed to be noticed, and he had noticed, and that was enough for now. It was Rin who told her. Not deliberately, not with that specific intention in mind, but Rin was a person who moved through Ironvale with a particular combination of access and judgment, and he had been watching the situation for long enough that he had made a calculation about what information needed to move and in which direction. It happened on a Wednesday morning, 5 weeks into Lena's time at the palace, when Rin stopped by the accounts office for what appeared to be a routine administrative matter regarding the tribute investigation records. Lena gave him the documents he needed. They exchanged the usual professional conversation, and then, at the door, Rin stopped. He looked at her for a moment in the way of someone who has decided to say a thing, and is only now working out exactly how to say it. "You are very observant," he said. "I work with figures," she said. "Observation is the job." "You observe more than figures," he said. "I have noticed." She looked at him. She waited. "Do you know what a mate bond looks like from the outside?" he said. The room went very still. "Yes," she said. "I know what it looks like." Rin looked at her steadily. He was not a person who made looks dramatic. He simply held them until they said what he needed them to say. "Then you probably know what you are looking at," he said. He left. Lena sat at her desk for a moment after he was gone. Gilbert was at his own desk across the room, fully absorbed in a column of numbers, oblivious. The other two clerks were talking quietly about something unrelated. She sat very still with Rin's words and what they meant, and what she had already suspected, and the difference between suspecting and having someone stand in the doorway and confirm it. She had been right. She had already known she was right, but knowing and having it confirmed were two different weights, and the confirmed weight was considerably larger. Caden Voss had a mate bond with her. His wolf had recognized her from the moment she walked into that waiting room. Everything since then, the careful attention, the Blue Door room, the forest walk, the book, the way he had appeared in the courtyard at exactly the right moment and looked at those men in a way that sent them moving before he finished speaking, all of it sat differently now. Not differently in terms of what it was, she had read it correctly, but differently in terms of what it meant for her and what she was going to do with it. She thought about Oliver Crane. She thought about standing in front of witnesses while he chose strategy. She thought about leaving Greywood on foot, alone, at 18 years old, with a small bag of belongings and no destination that wasn't away. She thought about what it felt like to have someone see a bond and decide against it. And she thought about what it would feel like to wait in this palace, in this role, in this increasingly warm and careful situation, for the moment when Caden Voss decided the same thing. Because if he had decided against the bond 11 years ago for a reason he still carried, that decision had not gone away. It was still there, the wall was still there, She could see it every time he pulled back from something he had been about to say, every time the look on his face shifted from unguarded to managed. She was not 17. She could not afford to assume that a bond on one side meant a future on both sides. She had evidence for that. She went back to work. She was precise and fast, and she did not make mistakes. At the end of the day, she helped Gilbert close the office and walked back to her room and sat on the bed and looked at the book on the table. She needed to know. She needed to stop reading the situation from the outside and simply ask, directly, because she was not going to spend another year of her life inside an arrangement she did not fully understand the terms of. She thought about how to ask this. She had been direct before, and he had responded to directness better than most people she had dealt with. He did not punish direct questions. He answered them, or he said clearly why he was not going to, which was itself an answer. She would ask him at dinner. She rehearsed the question while she washed her face and changed and walked up to the second-floor east corridor. And when she got there and knocked on the blue door and heard him say, "Come in," she walked in with the question ready. He was already at the small table. There was food on the tray. He looked up and something in his face did the thing it did when she arrived. The small settling, the alignment that she could now, with the knowledge she was carrying, read for exactly what it was. She sat down. "Rin spoke to me today," she said. He was very still for a moment. "About what?" he said, though she could tell from the quality of the stillness that he already knew. "About what a mate bond looks like from the outside," she said, "and that I am probably looking at one." The room was very quiet, outside the window. The palace grounds were settling into the sounds of early evening, distant voices, the wind in the old trees, nothing that intruded. Caden looked at her, and he was not managing the look this time. She did not know whether that was because he had decided not to, or because what she had said had gotten through faster than his management could follow. "Lena," he said. "I am not asking you to confirm it," she said. "I know what I am looking at. I am asking what you intend to do about it." He was quiet for a long moment. "I have been asking myself the same question," he said. "What answer have you found?" He looked at the table. He set down the bread he had been holding and did not pick it up again. "I made a decision a long time ago," he said, "about a different situation. The decision was that I would not pursue what the bond wants. I made it for reasons that were real." "I know you did," she said. "I can see the wall." He looked at her. "Can you?" "Yes," she said. "I have been looking at it since the second week." He was quiet again. She let the quiet be what it was. "The reasons were real," he said again. "She chose." He stopped. He started again. "Someone chose. Against the bond. And I concluded that the bond was a want, and that wants were not a sufficient reason to reach for things." "I understand," she said. "Do you?" "Yes," she said. "I was rejected at 18. I know what it feels like to have someone look at a bond and decide no. I know it very specifically, and I know it in every direction." He looked at her. Something moved across his face that was not small at all. "I know you do," he said. "Which is why I need to ask you directly," she said. "Because I am not able to be in this situation without knowing what it is. I am not able to keep having dinner in this room and walking by the forest and talking about figures and pack law and all of it, and not know whether I am building something or standing in the middle of something that is going to close in a direction I do not want." She said it steadily. She had decided, sometime between sitting on the bed and coming up the stairs, that she was going to say the true thing without dressing it up, because she was 22 years old, and she had already been wrong about this once, and she was not going to manage herself through another wrong one. Caden was looking at her. "I do not know," he said. It was not what she expected him to say. "You do not know," she repeated. "I have been trying to know," he said. "I have been trying to resolve it into a decision. It is the kind of thing I resolve into decisions. I have not been able to." She sat with this for a moment. "What is stopping you?" He looked at her with the look that was not managed. "You," he said. "And the fact that you are not a decision to make. You are a person in front of me, and every time I sit down to make the decision, that is what I see instead." Lena looked at the table. She breathed. "I have to be honest with you," she said. "I cannot wait for you to work out the decision. I cannot stay in this palace, in this situation, in this room, while you are still on that side of the wall, not because I do not want to, because I know what it does to me to be wanted, and not chosen, and I am not going to do that to myself again." The silence that followed was the longest one they had ever sat in. "I am not asking you to choose right now," she said. "I am telling you that I am going to stop coming up here until you have worked out what you want, not as a threat, just, I am protecting myself." He was looking at her with an expression that she had never seen on his face before. It was not the governor's look. It was not the professional attention. It was something older than both of those, something he had apparently been keeping on the far side of the wall along with everything else. "Lena," he said. "I am going to go," she said. She stood. "I will see you at work." She walked to the door. She opened it. "Lena," he said again. She stopped. She did not turn around yet. "I hear you," he said. "I am hearing you." She turned to look at him. He was still at the table, and he looked, for the first time since she had known him, like a man who had been reached, not broken, not collapsed, but reached. Something had gotten through the wall, not by pushing it but by simply being honest in front of it, and the something was visible in his face in a way that made her chest tighten. "Good," she said. "That is good." She went down the stairs. She went back to her room. She sat on the bed for a long time without reading, without thinking, with just the window and the dark and the sound of the Ironvale night settling around her. She had told the truth. She had said the honest thing, and she had not flinched from it, and he had heard it. What he was going to do with it was not up to her. She had put the truth down in the space between them, and now it was there, and he was going to have to decide what to do with it, and she was going to have to let him decide without trying to manage the outcome. This was harder than the speaking had been. She lay down without getting under the blanket, and she looked at the ceiling, and she breathed, carefully, until her chest stopped being tight, and then she closed her eyes and she thought about the forest path, because that was a good thing to think about, and she let herself be glad that she had walked on it. Caden sat in the room with the blue door for a long time after she left. The food on the tray went cold, the fire burned down. He did not move from the chair. He sat with what she had said, all of it, every word of it. He sat with the steadiness of her voice when she said, "I know what it does to me to be wanted and not chosen." He sat with the specific quality of that sentence, which was not self-pity, was not an accusation, was simply the honest statement of a fact that had a weight of 4 years behind it. She had been where he had been. She knew that place from the inside, and she had looked at him and the wall and the specific situation they were both standing in, and she had chosen herself, not dramatically, not by making it about him or demanding something from him. She had simply said what was true and acted accordingly, and then she had gone. This was, he thought, the most precise and honest thing anyone had done in front of him in a very long time. He sat with it. He let it sit on him. He let the wall feel what it felt like with her gone from the room, which was different from what it felt like with her in it, and different again from what it had felt like for the last 11 years, when there was no one specifically to feel the difference about. The fire went out. He was still in the chair when Rin appeared in the doorway, coming to leave the evening report. Rin saw the dark room, the cold tray, the king sitting in a chair in the specific posture of a man who is not resting but is very deeply in something. Rin set the report on the table by the door. "She told me she spoke to you," Rin said. "Yes. How do you feel about that?" Caden was quiet for a moment. "I feel like I need to think." "You have been thinking for 5 weeks," Rin said gently. "I know." Caden Rin came into the room and sat in the chair she had been sitting in, which he had never done before. It was a small thing. That meant he was not speaking as Beta right now, but as the person who had known Caden the longest. "What would it take to make you stop thinking?" Caden looked at him in the dark. "I do not know," he said. "Something would have to give." "The wall," Rin said. "Yes. Walls give," Rin said. "When you stop putting all your weight against them. Sometimes the only thing holding a wall up is the pressure of the person on the other side of it." Caden was very still. "She stopped pushing," Rin said. "She moved. What does that do to the wall?" He left without waiting for an answer, which was how Rin always left when he had said the right thing, quickly, before Caden could argue with it. Caden sat alone in the dark. After a long time, he turned that question over and found the answer to it, and the answer was not what he had expected, and it took everything he had to sit with it, and he did. She did not come to dinner on Thursday. She did not come on Friday either. She was in the accounts office every day, prompt and precise and thorough, and she nodded to him when they passed in the corridor and answered his questions when he had administrative ones, and she was fine. She was simply fine in the way someone is fine when they have made a decision about themselves and are standing behind it. It was worse than he had anticipated. Not the absence exactly. He had known she would be absent. The absence was what she had said would happen, and he had accepted it. What was worse was the clarity of it, the way the evenings now had a specific quality to them that they had not had before she arrived, and that they now had in a different way, because the space where she would have been was more present than the space had been before. He worked. He governed. He attended council meetings and made rulings and reviewed documentation and handled the Western Quarter investigation and dealt with 2 other territory matters that required his personal attention. He was, by every external measure, exactly as effective as he always was. Rin watched him perform all of this and said nothing, because Rin had said what needed to be said and was now respecting the process. On Saturday, Caden walked to the accounts office at the end of the day, stood in the open doorway, and asked Gilbert whether the North Quarter Archive reconciliation had been completed. Gilbert said that it had been completed that afternoon. He said it with the specific enthusiasm of someone who was proud of the work and wanted to talk about it. He talked about it for 5 minutes. Caden listened with appropriate attention. He did not look at Lena's desk. He was very careful about not looking at Lena's desk. This was because she was at the desk and he was not going to stand in the doorway under the guise of a work question and look at her like a man who was trying not to look at her, which was the most useless kind of looking there was. He thanked Gilbert. He walked back down the corridor and up to his study and stood at the window and thought about what Rin had said about walls. Walls give when you stop putting all your weight against them. He had been putting his weight against this particular wall for 11 years. He had put it there on a specific day, at a specific moment, when a girl named Petra had looked at a bond and chosen something else. He had built the wall out of that choice, and he had maintained it as a structure in his life, a permanent load-bearing element of who he was and how he operated. But the thing Rin had said, and the thing he had been sitting with since Thursday night when he sat in the dark room for a long time, the thing was this. He had made the wall because of Petra. He had concluded from Petra that wanting something made you vulnerable to being not chosen, and that not being chosen was a pain that he did not intend to expose himself to again. He had maintained the wall in order to avoid that exposure, and the wall had worked. For 11 years it had worked, and the cost of it was the dormant wolf, and the evenings alone, and the specific quality of the space that had not had a shape until she arrived and gave it one. The wall had been built in response to one person's choice, and the person standing on the other side of it now was not Petra. Was not someone who had looked at a bond and weighed it against strategy. Was someone who had been where he had been, had known exactly the specific quality of being wanted and not chosen, and who, rather than using that to demand something from him, had simply said the truth and chosen herself. He had built a wall against the wrong thing. He had built it against the experience of rejection, and maintained it against all future risk of the same. But what was on the other side of it now was not a risk. It was a person who had already demonstrated, by moving away, that she was not going to do to him what Petra had done. A person who had said, "I am protecting myself," not, "I am threatening you." A person who deserved better than a wall that had never been built for her. He stood at the window until the sun went down. Then he went to find Rin. Rin was in the administrative wing, finishing the last of the day's paperwork. He looked up when Caden came in, took in the king's face, and set down his pen. "I need to know where she is," Caden said. "The East Wing," Rin said. "In her room. She had dinner from the canteen, and went up about 20 minutes ago." Caden turned. "Caden," Rin said. He stopped. "Go," Rin said. "Just go." Caden went. He had not been to the East Wing staff quarters often. It was not part of his usual route through the palace. He knew which corridor it was, and he walked there without hesitation, and when he found the door with the small card that said Ashford, he raised his hand to knock and then stopped. He stood in front of the door and thought about what he was going to say. He had given a great many speeches in his life. He had addressed councils and pacts and territory authorities and adversaries and supplicants and men twice his age who needed to be told things they did not want to hear. He was good at saying things. He was precise and clear, and he knew how to put words together so that they meant exactly what he intended them to mean. He could not, standing in front of this door, think of a single word. He knocked. A moment, then her voice. "Who is it?" "Caden," he said. His voice came out even. This surprised him. A longer moment. Then the door opened. She was in plain clothes, the same kind of simple, worn clothing she always had, because she still had only what she had arrived with. Her hair was down. She looked at him with the brown eyes that read him every time, and the expression that was not readable, because she was waiting to see what this was before she showed anything. "Can I come in?" he said. She looked at him for a moment. Then she stepped back and let him in. The room was small. He had not been in it before. There was the narrow bed, the washstand, the window, a single lamp, the book he had given her on the table, a neat stack of papers that were clearly work she had brought home. The room had the quality of a place that a careful person was living in temporarily. Everything in its place, nothing accumulated, nothing that would be difficult to pack. That last part hit him harder than he expected. He stood in the center of the room. His hands were at his sides. He was doing something with them that he was not fully aware of, something slightly uncertain, which was not an experience he had often with his hands. "I want to tell you something," he said. She stood near the table, her arms crossed loosely, not defensively, just the way she stood when she was paying full attention. "When I was 17, he said, a girl named Petra chose not to accept the bond. She had reasons. They were strategic reasons. She told me them." He paused. "I walked away from that conversation and I decided that the bond was a vulnerability, and that the way to be safe from vulnerability was to close the thing that created it. I closed my wolf." He stopped. "I thought I had closed my wolf. It turned out I had only shelved it for 11 years. She was quiet. "What you said on Wednesday was true," he said. "All of it. You have been looking at a wall. The wall was there. It is still there." He looked at her steadily. "What I am trying to tell you is that the wall was not built for you. I built it in response to a specific moment, a specific person, a specific choice, and I have been maintaining it against everything since, including you, which is wrong." She said nothing for a moment, then, "Wrong how?" "Wrong in that you are not Petra. You are not a person who is going to weigh me against strategy. I know that, because you already had the chance to use what you know against me, and you did not. You told the truth and you moved." He paused. "You are not the person I was defending against. I have been applying a very old decision to a completely different situation, and I am here because I want to stop doing that." Lena looked at him. She looked at him for a long time with those measuring eyes. "What does stopping look like?" she said. "I do not know exactly," he said. "I have not done it before." "You do not know what you want." "I know what I want," he said. "I want this. I want the conversations and the evening, and the forest path and you reading in that chair. I want to stop pretending the evenings since Wednesday have not been different from the evenings before that." "They have been different for you," she said. "Yes." "How do you know they have been different for me?" she said. He looked at her. "Because you said so. You said you could not stay in the situation while I was on this side of the wall. That is only true if the situation was something to you." She held his gaze for a moment. "It was something to me," she said. "That is not the question." "What is the question?" She uncrossed her arms. She stood up from the table and came to stand in front of him, closer than they had stood before, close enough that he was aware of the specific quality of nearness that his wolf responded to every time she was near, and that he had spent 5 weeks managing. "The question," she said, "is whether the wall coming down is something that happens because I came close, and because the evenings were lonely, and the wolf has been awake for 5 weeks, or whether it is something that happens because you actually want me, not as a bond to accept, and not as a solution to loneliness. As a person, this specific person." She said this quietly and clearly. The way she said things she had prepared herself to say, because they needed to be said. "You," he said, "this specific person." He did not say it quickly, or with the smooth certainty of someone who has rehearsed. He said it the way someone says something true that they have been carrying. "You argued with me in front of my counsel and were right. You found a 4-year-old filing error in a supply record that my entire administration had missed. You sit across from me, and you do not perform anything, and you never have, and that is—" He stopped. Started again. "That is the most genuinely restful thing I have experienced in 9 years of ruling this pack, and that is before the wolf, before any of it." The room was very quiet. She looked at him. "You do not know what to do with your hands," she said. He looked down at his hands, which were doing the uncertain thing again. "No," he said. "You do not know what to do with your hands," she said again, more quietly. And the way she said it was not an observation anymore. It was something else entirely. She sat down on the edge of the bed. She looked at him standing in the middle of her small room. "Sit down," she said. "You are making me nervous standing like that." He sat. He sat in the chair across from the bed, the only chair in the room, and he folded his hands in his lap and looked at her. "I have conditions," she said. "I know," he said. "You do not know what they are yet." "I know you have them," he said. "I expected you would." Something moved in her expression. Not quite a smile, but the shape of one, the precursor to it. "First," she said, "I am not giving up the job." "I did not expect you to," he said. "Second, I am not moving into palace quarters that are different from these quarters until I have decided I want to, which may take a while." "That is reasonable," he said. "Third, I am going to keep telling you when you are wrong about things." "I would be concerned if you stopped," he said. She looked at him. She was measuring again. "Fourth," she said, and this one was slower. I am not going to be afraid of this, but I am also not going to rush it. I was not afraid of the bond at 18, and I did not wait, and I ended up alone at the side of a road with a bag. I am going to take this at whatever pace makes sense. Yes, he said. That is, yes. You agree with all four of them? Yes. That quickly. I was not going to argue the fourth one, he said, especially that one. She looked at him for a long moment. The lamp was warm and low. Outside the window, the Iron Veil night had settled into the particular quiet of a place that was large and dark and old. All right, she said. It was the same all right she had said in the waiting room on the first day, but it was different now. The same words with a completely different weight. He felt the wall in him do something. It did not fall down. It did not vanish. It shifted, the way the weight of something shifts when the person who has been holding themselves against it decides to stop holding. He did not know how to describe what that felt like, so he did not try. He sat in the chair in her small room, with his hands in his lap, and she sat on the edge of the bed across from him, and the night came full and heavy around the palace, and they talked for a long time. Not about governance, not about documentation. They talked about the things people talk about when they are beginning, carefully and without rushing, to let someone in. She told him about her father, the parts she had not said before. He told her about Petra, more than the summary. She told him about leaving Greywood. He told her about the first year of ruling, when he was 22, and he understood what he had taken on, and he went to Rin one night and said, I am not sure I know how to do this, and Rin had said, no one is sure when they start, and that had been enough to get through the night. It was past midnight when she finally said she needed to sleep. He stood. He walked to the door. He looked at her from the doorway, the small room, the lamp, the book on the table that he had given her standing by the bed with her hair down and her brown eyes steady. Good night, Lena, he said. Good night, Caden, she said. He went down the corridor with the particular quality of feeling that is specific to people who have been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and have just, for the first time, set it down. He did not run into Ren on the way back to his quarters. Ren, who had the finest instincts of any beta in the territory, had gone to bed, but in the morning when he came to the study with the day's paperwork, he looked at Caden once, and Caden met his eyes, and no words were needed, and none were offered. Rin simply put the papers on the desk, said the morning briefing is at 8, and went to make the tea. There was no announcement. That was perhaps the thing the Council of Ironvale found most disorienting in the days that followed. Kings announced things, kings made proclamations, especially about things of this magnitude. The mate bond of an alpha king was a pack matter, a political matter, a thing with implications for alliances and inheritance, and the future of the territory. Caden Voss told his council the same way he told them everything important, in a morning briefing, without ceremony, between the Western Quarter investigation update and the quarterly revenue figures. Miss Ashford, he said, is my mate. I am informing you as a council before it becomes general knowledge in the pack. The legal implications, such as they are, will be handled through standard process. Miss Ashford will remain in her current administrative role. Nothing changes about how this council operates. He moved to the next item. There was a moment, approximately 3 seconds, during which 11 experienced pack counselors simply looked at their king. Several of them had the expression of people who had many things they would like to say, and were rapidly calculating whether any of those things were advisable to say in the next 30 seconds. None of them said anything. The briefing continued. Rhine, standing to the side, watched the faces of the 11 counselors in the way that a good beta watches things, not as entertainment but as information. What he saw, beneath the initial shock, was something that surprised him a little. He had expected resistance. He had expected at least one of the counselors to raise the question of protocol, or the question of Lena's background, or the question of Greywood and the debt, and whether the optics of this were going to create problems with the Territory Authority Council. Instead, what he saw, after the 3 seconds, was a kind of collective settling, the same thing, in 11 different versions, on 11 different faces. The recognition of something that, when it was said plainly by the king, was not a surprise. It was more like the confirmation of something they had already, on some level, been watching happen. Afterwards, in the corridor outside the council chamber, the counselor named Edith Crane, who was the oldest member of the council, and who had served through 2 reigns before Caden's, stopped Rin with a hand on his arm. How long, she said. Since the day she arrived, Rin said. Edith looked at him. And how long did he resist it? Until last Saturday night, Rin said. Edith made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but had the same shape. That is on the faster end for him, she said. I have watched that man argue himself out of decisions for months at a time. He had help, Rin said. Edith looked at him with the sharp eyes that had not dimmed despite her age. She argued with him, she said, once or twice. Good, Edith said, and walked away. Lena found out about the council meeting from Gilbert, who heard about it from the head of the administrative wing, who had been in the corridor outside the council chamber and had a gift for overhearing things. She was at her desk when Gilbert looked up from his work and said, in the careful tone he used when he wanted to convey information without drawing attention to the fact that he was conveying information, "The king spoke to the council this morning." She looked at him. "About?" "You," Gilbert said, "and him, and the relevant connection between you." Lena was very still for a moment. She looked at the record in front of her. She looked at the window. She looked at her hands on the desk. "All right," she said. Gilbert looked at her for a moment with the expression of a man who wants to say something further, but cannot determine the appropriate register. "He did not ask you first," Gilbert said finally. "No," she said. "Is that all right?" She thought about it. He had not asked her first. He had told his council, which was the right sequence for a ruling king. Council before public, official before personal. The decision about whether and when the pack knew was a governance decision as much as a personal one, and she understood that. She understood the sequence. What she was feeling was not a complaint about the sequence. It was something else. The specific, slightly dizzying sensation of a thing becoming real. She had said all right in a small room on Saturday night, and they had talked until midnight, and he had been back every evening since, and the Blue Door room was back, and things were different now. Lighter in the way that things get lighter when they are not being weighed down by what they cannot say. And now the council knew, which meant the pack would know. Which meant this was not a private arrangement between two careful people anymore. It was a thing, a real thing, with a shape in the world. She was not afraid of it. She had said she would not be afraid of it, and she had meant it, but she was aware of its weight. She went back to the records in front of her. She worked for the rest of the morning with careful precision, and she did not make mistakes. At noon, Caden appeared in the doorway of the accounts office. Gilbert looked up. The other clerks looked up. There was the usual straightening. Caden stepped into the doorway and looked at Lena and said, "When you have a moment." She stood, because she had been expecting this, and followed him into the corridor. They stood in the corridor. He looked at her. She looked at him. "You heard," he said. "Gilbert is well connected," she said. "I should have told you before the council meeting," he said. "The sequence was correct," she said. "Council before pack. I understand how it works." "That is not the same as being told in advance." "No," she said, "it is not." They were quiet for a moment. The corridor was empty except for them. "I am sorry," he said. "I moved faster than I should have, in that one thing." She looked at him. She was aware that he did not apologize often, not because he was too proud for it, but because he was careful enough about his decisions that he rarely had cause to. When he did apologize, it was the genuine article. "It is all right," she said. And then, because they had gotten to the point in this situation where she did not have to manage her reactions around him, she said, "I am going to need a moment to get used to it being real." "Take whatever time you need," he said. "You said that about other things," she said, "and you have been patient." "You set the pace," he said. "That was the fourth condition." "I know," she said. "I said it. I am just noting that you have been patient." "I am invested in getting this right," he said. She looked at him for a moment, then she said, "I am going to need better clothes." He looked at her. It was the look he sometimes got when she said something he was not expecting, a slight recalibration. "The pack is going to look at me," she said, "when they know. And I have 2 sets of clothes that were washed too many times, and I am not going to stand next to you in those, not because of optics, because I have some self-respect." He almost smiled. She had learned to read the almost smile, which was a barely there shift in the corner of his mouth that she had initially thought was nothing, and now knew was a great deal. "Talk to Elise in the household staff," he said. "She handles the accounts for the supply staff. There is a standard allocation for senior administrative positions that you have not accessed. It covers clothing and personal items." "I am a permanent staff member now," she said. Gilbert's recommendation went through. "Yes," he said. "So access the allocation. Will you tell me when you are going to do things like the council meeting, from now on?" "Yes," he said, without hesitation. She nodded. "Then we are fine," she said. "Go govern something." He turned to go. She almost went back into the accounts office. Then she said, "Caden." He stopped. "Thank you for not waiting," she said. "For deciding and then doing it." He turned to look at her. "You gave me the room to decide," he said. "I had to use it." She went back into the office. Gilbert was very carefully not looking at her, which was how she knew he had been paying attention to all of it. She sat at her desk. She picked up her pen. She pulled the next record from the stack. The pen was steady in her hand. The pack learned over the following days, in the way that pack knowledge always moved, not from a formal announcement but from the current that ran between people. The guards who had overheard the corridor conversation, the kitchen staff who had noticed the change in the king's dinner arrangements, Polly, who knew everything and told it to everyone who asked, and several who did not. The response was not what Lena had expected. She had expected, based on 4 years of experience of how packs treated unmated omegas of low status, a certain quality of reaction. She had been prepared to manage it, not to be hurt by it necessarily, because she had gotten good at not being hurt by things that did not deserve the energy, but to be alert to it. The reaction she actually got was different. The Iron Veil pack, it turned out, had been watching their king for 9 years. They knew what Caden Voss looked like when he was purely governing, and in the last 5 weeks they had been watching something else, subtle, not performed, visible only in the small ways, and they had drawn their own conclusions before the council meeting confirmed anything. The pack accepted it the way they accepted most things Caden did, which was with the trust built by 9 years of good governance. He had not given them a reason to doubt his judgment. They extended the same assumption to this. What surprised Lena most was Edith Crane, the elder counselor, who stopped by the accounts office on the 3rd day and looked at Lena with the direct eyes of a woman who had been assessing people in positions of power for 40 years. "You are younger than I expected," Edith said. "I am 22, Lena said. "I know. I read the file." Edith sat down in the chair Gilbert offered her. "I wanted to meet you in your workspace, not in a meeting room." "Tells me more." Lena looked at her. "What does it tell you?" "That you are here because the work is the work," Edith said, "not because of proximity to the king." "I was here before the king was a consideration," Lena said. "I know that too." Edith looked around the office at the neat stacks of completed records, the organized system Lena had developed over the weeks, the marked copies of the tribute documentation pinned on the reference board. "The backlog," she said. "Cleared," Lena said, "and current." "Gilbert has been trying to clear that backlog for 3 years, Edith said. "I found a more efficient cross-referencing method," Lena said. "It is not complicated once you can see the pattern." Edith looked at her for a long moment. "You are going to have people who are not sure about you," she said. "Not because of who you are, because of where you came from, and how you arrived." "I know," Lena said. "I am telling you because I am going to be one of them," Edith said. "Not permanently, but for a while. I want you to know in advance because I think you are the kind of person who prefers to know things in advance." Lena looked at the old woman with the sharp eyes and felt a respect for the directness of this that she had not anticipated. "I appreciate that," she said. "Good," Edith said. "Now tell me how you found the Western Quarter discrepancy in a supply record," Lena told her. Edith listened without interrupting. At the end of the explanation, she asked 2 precise questions that told Lena she had understood every word. "All right," Edith said and stood. "I will tell you if and when I have finished being one of the ones who is not sure. In the meantime, I imagine the tribute documentation system could use some structural improvements, beyond what you have already done. I have suggestions." "I would welcome them," Lena said. Edith left. Gilbert, who had been very carefully doing his own work throughout the entire conversation, looked up after she was gone and said, "That went better than expected." "Did you expect it to go badly?" Lena said. "Edith Crane has been known to be uncomfortable about change," Gilbert said diplomatically. "She is direct about being uncomfortable," Lena said. "That is different from being opposed." Gilbert thought about this. "Yes," he said, "I suppose it is." Caden noticed the change in Lena around the 5th week after the council meeting. It was not a dramatic change. It was more like watching something settle into its correct position, a gear finding its tooth, a weight finding its balance point. She had always been capable and precise and observant. Those things did not change, but the quality of careful distance that she had maintained through the first weeks, the thing she had kept on the surface of herself like a fine net, that she could pull in at any moment, that was loosening. She argued with him in the blue door room now without checking herself first. She laughed more often, the real version, the one that used her whole face. When something frustrated her at work, she said so, and when something pleased her, that was visible too. She was becoming, he thought, The version of herself that had probably always been there under the management. He found it difficult to look away from. They were in the Blue Door room on a Tuesday evening, when she looked at him across the table and said, "Can I ask you something you might not want to answer?" "Yes," he said. "What happened the morning she came back?" "Petra." He was quiet for a moment. "She came back twice," he said. "The first time was a year after. She had accepted the match with the Eastern Pac, but the match had not settled, in the way that connections that do not go both ways do not settle. She came to tell me she had made a mistake." Lena was very still. "I told her that I had heard her the first time," he said, "and that I had built my life accordingly, and that I wished her well." "And the second time?" Lena said. 3 years later. She had been through a separation from the Eastern match. She came to ask whether the bond was still available. "What did you say?" "I said I did not know," he said. "I said I had closed the part of me that could answer that question, and that I was not sure it could be reopened." He said this steadily, looking at the table. Then he looked up at her. "I was not wrong about that, when I said it. At the time I believed the wolf was genuinely gone." "What changed?" she said. "You walked into a room," he said. She looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at the window, and he watched her face do the thing it sometimes did when she was receiving information and deciding where it fit, the quiet processing. "I am glad you did not know," she said, "that the wolf was still there. If you had known, you might have been looking for it, and I do not want to be the person you found because you were looking." "You are the person who was there," he said. "I was not looking. I had stopped looking. That is the whole point of it." She looked at him. The evening light was in the room and in her face, and he was looking at her with the look he did not manage anymore, the one that was simply there, and she looked back with the same quality of openness. "I am glad too," she said. "That is all. I am glad about all of it." He reached across the table. He put his hand over hers on the table. Just once, briefly. It was the first time he had touched her intentionally since that day in the corridor when she had said, "I cannot wait for you to work out the decision." She looked at his hand, then she looked at him. She turned her hand over under his, very gently, and held on. The wolf was not wild. It was not roaring or consuming, or the storm that some people described. It was simply calm. The deep water calm of something that has found what it was made for, and is no longer spending its energy on searching. They did not say anything more about it that night. They did not need to. The evening continued, and the room was warm, and outside the Ironvale forest was dark and old and very still. And inside the room the King of Ironvale sat across from a woman who had arrived with nothing, and owed it all, and had found, in the specific precise way she found everything, the thing that no one had expected her to find. And she was not afraid of it. She had said she would not be, and she was not. Her hand stayed in his, and the night settled around them, and neither of them moved toward the door for a very long time. Harlan Vex's formal protest arrived at Ironvale on a Monday morning, 6 weeks after the council meeting. It was addressed to the Council of Territory Authorities and copied to Caden as a courtesy, which was the kind of courtesy that was not courtesy at all but a statement. The protest challenged the legitimacy of the Mate Bond Declaration, on the grounds that Lena Ashford had been an active subject of an Ironvale administrative review at the time the bond was recognized, and that the King's personal interest in her case constituted a conflict of interest that compromised the outcomes of that review. It was, legally speaking, a thin argument, but it was not nothing. It was the kind of argument that, in the right political climate, with the right set of people examining it, could create enough noise to be damaging even if it ultimately went nowhere. Wren brought the letter to Caden with a face that said he had been hoping this would not come but had prepared for it. Caden read the letter once. He set it on the desk. "He is right about one thing," he said. Wren looked at him. "The review was ongoing when the bond became apparent," Caden said. "I cannot say with certainty that my personal interest did not accelerate certain decisions in that review, the debt correction, the labor credit recalculation. I would have reached the same conclusions regardless. But the speed at which I reached them was influenced." "You are not going to say that to the Territory Authority Council," Wren said. "I am going to say exactly that to the Territory Authority Council," Caden said. Wren was quiet for a moment. "That is going to give Vex what he is looking for. It is going to give Vex the truth," Caden said. "Which is different. The truth includes the fact that the calculation was correct regardless of the speed. The truth includes the fact that every outcome of the review is independently verifiable. The truth includes the fact that the Western Quarter investigation was initiated based on Lena's finding in the supply records, before the bond was declared, and has now produced confirmed evidence of misreporting that implicates Greywood operations." He picked up the letter. "Let Vex have the truth. It does not help him." Rin looked at the letter and then at the king. You are going to make this a transparent review. I am going to make it so transparent that there is nothing for Vex to point to, Kaidan said. He is looking for shadows. I am going to put every light on. The response to the Territory Authority Council took 3 days to write. It was comprehensive, precise, and included full documentation of every step of the debt review. The original calculation, the identification of the escalation fees, the labor credit discrepancy, the timeline of Kaidan's personal involvement, the separation between the administrative process and the bond declaration, and the independence of the evidence that supported every outcome. It also included a single paragraph that Kaidan wrote himself, that Ryan read twice and did not try to change. The paragraph said, simply, that at the time of Miss Ashford's arrival, Kaidan had recognized the mate bond, that he had not acted on that recognition until the relevant administrative matters were fully documented and independently verifiable, that he was aware of the appearance of conflict and was providing complete documentation so that the Territory Authority could determine, from the evidence rather than from his assertion, whether the outcomes of the review were correct. He said, "Here is everything. Judge it." The Territory Authority Council reviewed the documentation over the following 2 weeks. During those 2 weeks, Kaidan governed. Lena worked. The Western Quarter investigation moved to its next stage, with 2 additional administrators brought in from the Territory Authority to ensure independence. The tribute records for the 3rd quarter were completed on time for the first time in 4 years. Vex sent 2 additional communications during this period. They received standard acknowledgement and were filed. The Territory Authority's response arrived on a Thursday. It was brief. It found no evidence of improper conduct. It found the outcomes of the debt review to be legally correct and fully supported by the documentation. It noted, in a line that Ryan read 3 times, that the transparency of Iron Vale's response to the original protest was itself a demonstration of appropriate conduct. It dismissed Vex's claim. Kaidan read the response. He put it in the relevant file. He went back to work. Rin waited until the end of the day. Then he said, with the understated emphasis of a man who has been patient for a very long time, "It is done." "It is done," Kaidan agreed. "Vex has no further ground." "Vex has the option of appealing the Territory Authority's decision," Kaidan said. "But the grounds for appeal are weaker than the original claim, and he knows it." "He is going to be very unhappy," Rin said. "Yes," Kaidan said. "He is going to be very unhappy, and Lena is going to keep her job and her correct debt settlement, and the Territory Authority has confirmed the Western Quarter investigation, and I think on balance those outcomes are acceptable." Rin smiled. It was a real smile, not the carefully neutral kind. She found out about the Territory Authority decision the same way she had found out about the council meeting. From Gilbert, who had an uncanny ability to receive information from the walls of the administrative wing. This time Kaidan also told her himself, and that evening, in the Blue Door room, before anything else, she listened to the full account of the protest and the response and the outcome, which he gave her completely, including the paragraph he had written about the bond, which he read to her from memory. She sat across from him and listened without interrupting. When he was done, she said, "You told them you recognized the bond before you acted on it." "Yes. And that you separated the administrative process from the personal situation." "As much as it is possible to do so, yes. And that you were putting everything in front of them and asking them to judge from the evidence." "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. "That was the right thing to do," she said. "I know. It was also not the easy thing," she said. "It was easier than the alternative," he said. "The alternative was to manage the narrative, which would have left something to manage forever." She looked at him. "You thought about it?" "Briefly," he said. "Rin talked me through it." "Rin is very good," she said. "He is the best beta I have ever known," Kaidan said, "and he has been protecting me from my own worst instincts for 12 years. She almost smiled. The precursor of it, the almost smile's equivalent on her face. "What are your worst instincts?" she said. "Efficiency," he said. "The instinct to make something clean and resolved as fast as possible, even if clean and fast is not the same as right." She looked at him. "I know that instinct," she said. "I used to have it about the debt. I wanted it resolved so badly that there were months when I would have accepted a settlement that was technically legal but not actually fair, just to be done with it." "What stopped you?" "I did the math," she said simply. "Every time I was about to accept something that was not right, I did the actual calculation, and the actual calculation told me it was wrong." She paused. "The actual calculation was always right. Feelings about being done with something are not a reliable measurement." He looked at her. "Is that what you do when you are not sure about something? You do the calculation?" I try to, she said. It does not always work. Some things do not have a reliable calculation. Such as? She looked at him evenly. This, she said. I could not calculate this. I tried. I kept coming back to the same thing, which was that I had looked at enough of your decisions to know how you made them. And when I looked at how you were making the decisions about me, I could not find a version of the calculation that added up to anything except what it was. What was it? He said. He knew the answer. He wanted to hear it from her. Someone who was trying, she said. Someone who was used to deciding, and had been brought to a place where deciding was not enough, and had to try. That was new. That was not something I had seen before, in anyone who was thinking about me. The room was quiet. Outside, the Iron Vale evening had gone full dark. The fire was low and warm. Somewhere further in the palace, very distantly, they could hear the sound of the night guard changing over, voices and footsteps, and then quiet again. She stood up from the table. She went to the window and stood looking out at the palace grounds, which were dark and still, the old Iron Vale trees just visible at the edge of the light. I want to see the forest, she said. Now, he said. Not now, properly, in the daytime, with you. He was quiet for a moment. Tomorrow, he said. The morning session ends at 11. We can go in the afternoon. She turned from the window. She looked at him across the room. All right, she said. It was neither of the previous all rights. This one was different, lighter, without the weight of waiting, without the carefulness of someone who is not yet sure where they stand. This was the all right of someone who knows where they stand and has decided they are staying. He heard it. He heard all the things the all right carried. They walked into the Iron Vale forest the next afternoon, with no guards, no agenda, and no destination. Caden had told Rin where they were going, and Rin had said nothing, except the path by the eastern edge is best in October, and had gone back to his paperwork. The forest was everything Caden had described and something he had not described, which was the quality of it with her in it. He had walked this forest alone many times. It was a different forest with someone beside him. The same trees, the same light, the particular way the old Iron Vale oaks filtered the afternoon, but different, because her eyes were on it, and she was asking questions and he was answering them, and the forest was answering back in the way forests do when you stop and pay attention. She stopped at one point, in a clearing where the light came through in a wide column that lit the undergrowth in the specific bright gold way of late autumn afternoon in old woodland, and she was very still for a moment, just looking at it. This is why you come here, she said. Yes, he said. To think? To stop thinking, he said. Those are different. She looked at him. You said that to me once before, about thinking and feeling. I remember. She looked back at the light in the clearing. I have not had a place to stop thinking, she said. For a long time, I have always been managing something, the debt, the situation, the next territory, the next thing. You have Iron Vale now, he said. She turned to look at him. The light was behind her. She was in his Iron Vale forest on a Tuesday afternoon in October, and she looked like she had always been here, which was the thing he had not expected to think, but thought anyway. I have Iron Vale now, she said. They walked on. He showed her the places he had named in his head over years of walking alone. The ridge where you could see 3 territories on a clear day. The stream that ran cold even in summer. The old tree that had been struck by lightning so long ago that the wound had grown over, and the scar had become part of the tree's shape. Something to grow around rather than a damage that defined it. She put her hand on the lightning scar on the old tree and held it there for a moment. How long ago? She said. I do not know, he said. Old enough that no one alive knows. She looked at the scar, at the way the bark had grown around it, closing the damage without hiding it, making it part of the tree's character, rather than something to pretend had not happened. She took her hand off the tree. I like this forest, she said. They walked back to the palace in the last of the afternoon light, and she was beside him, and the wolf was quiet in the specific deep way it had been quiet since that night in her small room, the way of something that has been searching and found, and is not searching anymore. The pack settled around them the way packs settle around what is real. It was not fast. It was not without the occasional person who had questions or adjustments to make, or things they needed to understand before they were comfortable. Edith Crane had said it plainly. She would tell Lena when she had finished being one of the ones who was not sure. She came to tell her 6 weeks after that first conversation, stopping by the accounts office at the end of a Tuesday and saying, with the directness that was simply how she communicated, that she had reached the end of her period of uncertainty. Lena thanked her. She meant it. The accounts office became, over time, the most current and precisely organized set of records in the Iron Vale administration, which Gilbert took as a personal achievement and which was, in large part, also Lena's achievement, though she did not advertise this because the work was the point, not the credit. The Western Quarter investigation concluded 3 months after Lena's arrival. It had expanded, over that time, to include 6 administrators, 1 senior supply coordinator, and 3 Greywood-linked operations that had been running the tribute misreporting and coordination. The Territory Authority fined Greywood operations significantly. The fines were not as large as they should have been, because these things rarely were, but they were real and documented and the record was there. Vex did not appeal the Territory Authority's decision on the bond matter. Rin had predicted he would not, and Rin was usually right. Lena's debt was settled in full and closed 4 months after she arrived at Iron Vale. She had Caden read her the final figures and verify the settlement himself, which he did, because she had asked, and because the numbers deserved a second pair of eyes. "It is done," he said, and put the closed file on his desk. "It is done," she said. She was quiet for a moment. "I have not been without it since I was 18, she said. "I know." "It is strange," she said, "not having it there." "It will feel less strange," he said, "and then it will feel like nothing at all, and that will be the correct thing." She looked at him. "How do you know?" she said. "I had a wall for 11 years, he said. "Now I do not have it. It felt strange for a while. Now it feels like something I cannot remember the particular weight of." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I want to move to better rooms." He looked at her, the almost smile. "The staff quarters are fine," he said. "They are what you chose." "I chose them when I did not know what I was choosing toward," she said. "I know more now." "What are you choosing toward?" he said. She looked at him with the brown eyes that had measured him from the first moment, and had not stopped measuring him since, which was something he had come to find, not disconcerting, but grounding. She was always looking for the accurate thing. She always found it. "You," she said simply, without dressing it up. "I have been choosing toward you since about the 4th week, and I am done being careful about admitting that." The wolf was not wild. The wolf was simply full. The whole quiet animal of it settled in the deep water calm, and Caden sat across from her in the blue door room, with his hands still, and his chest something he had no word for that was not happiness, because happiness was too simple and too even for what this was, which was more textured than that, more specific, the particular thing you feel when you have been a very precise person for your whole life, and something has arrived that precision alone could not have found. "All right," he said. It was not the all right she used, but it carried the same weight in a different voice, and she heard it. She heard everything. The morning of the first public assembly after the bond was formally announced, Lena came to stand at the side of the throne platform for the first time. She was not on the platform. She was to the left of it, where Rin stood on the right, in the space that had not had a person in it for 9 years. She was wearing a deep blue that Gilbert's archive girl Polly had helped her choose, and that suited her in the way that certain colors suit certain people, because they match something internal as much as external. Her hair was back. Her hands were still. She looked like what she was, a person who had been tested and had not broken and was now standing in a room that was hers because she had done the work to understand what it meant to be in it. Caden was already on the platform when she arrived. He looked at her once, and she looked at him once, and the look carried everything that a look could carry between two people who had spent months saying difficult things to each other, until the truth was the only thing left between them. 200 wolves exhaled. The assembly began. Caden worked through the cases with his usual precision and clarity. He gave a ruling on a trade dispute that was exactly right. He asked 3 precise questions in a boundary matter that reached the center of the issue in less time than both parties had spent introducing it. He listened to a petition from a family in the South Quarter with full attention and no performance of attention. Lena stood to the left of the platform and watched. She watched him do the work she had been watching him do since she arrived, the work that was not about power but about getting things right, and she thought about a waiting room, and 2 large men, and a king who had come to that room himself because his beta had told him a staff member had been waiting for hours. At the end of the assembly, when the 200 wolves were beginning to move toward the exits, she watched one of them, a young Omega woman, standing at the back with the particular stillness of someone who has been waiting through the whole assembly for a specific case that did not get called, catch Caden's eye. He saw her. He said something to Rin. Rin went to find the woman and brought her to the side of the platform, and Caden stepped down from it and stood in front of her at the same level and asked what she needed. She watched him listen to the woman. She watched the woman's face change. The small, particular way that a person's face changes when they are being heard, actually heard, by someone with the authority to act on what they say. He gave her an answer. She thanked him. She left. Rinnan appeared at Lena's shoulder. 3 years at the platform, he said quietly. And that still happens. What does? She said. He always sees the person who did not get to speak, Rin said. Every assembly. The one who is still there at the end. He always notices. She watched Caden come down off the platform and exchange a word with Edith Crane, who was gathering her things. He said something that made Edith's sharp eyes do a thing that might have been approval. He noticed me, Lena said. Yes, Rin said. He did. She looked at Rin. Rin looked at her. Thank you, she said, for telling me, back in the beginning, when I needed someone to say the clear thing. You were going to figure it out regardless, Rin said. You always find the pattern eventually. Eventually is too slow sometimes, she said. Rin smiled. It was a real smile, not the careful professional one. I thought so too, he said. Caden walked back across the throne room toward them. The last of the assembly's wolves were filing out around him, and the room was large and pale and morning-lit, and he was simply a man crossing a room toward the people he trusted most. He stopped beside her. The assembly ran long, he said. It ran correctly, she said. Same result. Not the same, she said. The almost smile. The real one. The one that used more of his face than he usually let it. They walked out of the throne room together, the three of them, and into the wide corridor of the Iron Veil Palace. And the palace was the same solid stone it had always been, unimpressed by ceremony and unaffected by sentiment, built to do a job and doing it. The only difference was that it was doing it with more people in it than it had been doing it with before. More specifically, one more person than it had the day Lena Ashford arrived with 2 enforcers and a debt and nothing else, and stood in a waiting room with her back straight and her hands folded and her eyes moving to the door when it opened. She was here. She had earned it in the most specific way available, by doing the work, finding the pattern, saying the true thing, choosing herself first, and then, when the wall came down not because it was pushed but because the person who had built it finally stopped holding it up, choosing this. Caden walked beside her through the corridor, and Rin walked on the other side, and the wolf was quiet, the deep settled quiet of a thing that has been running and has come to a stop, not because it is tired, but because it has arrived. The Iron Veil forest was visible through the corridor window, dark and very old at the edge of the morning. She had said she liked it. He was already thinking about where to take her next.